What's good, IB Nation? Welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast presented by our friends over at FanDuel. I'm Vince D'Addario. That's Trevor Trowbridge, and we are back for a little afternoon soiree where we are talking defense today. Trevor, yesterday, outside of the Brian Kelly, Brian Driscoll rant situation based on the podcast that went down a couple of days ago, it was all about offense yesterday. And it was position battles on offense and then changes we'd like to see on offense. And then today we're flipping the script and we're going defense. We're going to talk about position battles defensively. And we are going to talk about, things we'd like to see, adjusted, change, depends on the adjective that you want to use, the verbiage. We're going to talk about that in show number 2. And then, of course, we will have a daily mailbag. And so if you have any questions, make sure you put a little MB or a little mailbox emoji in front of it so that we can see it while we're talking about other stuff, and go ahead and get that started for the third show of the day. So, Trev, how you doing today, my man? It's you and me.
We're good, man. This is second Vince and Trev show in a 3-day span. Look at us. Who's got it better than us, man?
No one. And I hate the fact that we're quoting Michigan. But it is what it is, and we're here. We're ready. We got a lot of good stuff to talk about today. Brian is taking the day off to work on the magazine. A lot going on behind the scenes with that. You and he are getting after it when it comes to the magazine, and I've started editing and doing some stuff on my end, and so I'm really excited about this magazine. And if you haven't heard yet, we're putting out a preseason magazine, Irish Breakdown's version of a preseason magazine for the first time ever, the inaugural preseason magazine. And the only way to get your hands on it is to be a member of the premium message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So make sure you check it out, because believe me, the monthly fee that you pay to be on there is worth every penny when it comes to the not only the information and everything you get from the board, but then you're also going to get the magazine. So it's only for members this year. We're testing it out. It's like a beta version of the magazine. We're testing it out. Next year, we will probably make it available to those people that are not on the message board, but we wanted to do something just for the members this year. So if you want access to the magazine, make sure you sign up at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I don't know what our published date is going to be. You might know that better than I do, but I know you guys are full steam ahead, and it's basically when we get done, we get done.
Yeah, right now we're in the weeds of knocking everything out and getting everything edited, but definitely the time frame as of right now is sooner rather than later. But I'm with you, man. I'm excited for it, and it's really cool to be a part of. A lot of exciting things going on right now at Irish Breakdown. Brian's definitely steering the ship in the right direction, man.
Yeah,
so
man.
I'm excited to see where this goes.
Just happy to be one of the crew. So we're definitely excited about that. But let's jump into today's topic, Trev. Today we are going to lead things off with our positional battles, positional breakdowns on the defense, and there's plenty of battles. By the way, we're almost going to cover, I think, every single level. We're definitely going to cover every single level of the defense. These battles are going to impact the lineup. Obviously, there's a bunch of returners, and so some of these battles aren't necessarily going to be starters. Some of them are, but there's going to be a lot of depth pieces. And on defense, of course, you rotate a heck of a lot more, on the defensive line, for example, than you do on the offensive line. So the depth is extremely important on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, without a doubt. When we talked about the offense yesterday, there was a lot of, hey, who steps up to be the next man in on the offensive line? And how does the tight end rotation shake out behind Cooper Flanagan? And, which one of the three talented options at boundary emerges? Defense, it's a little bit of a different question. I think this is the side of the ball that throughout the course of the offseason, there's been a lot of, they'll be fine because they have this guy coming back and this guy coming back and this guy coming back. one of the reasons why I like what we're addressing in today's show is we're going to talk about some of those positions where they don't have the guy coming back. Now, they supplement some of those losses with some really, really talented individuals. Some have to elevate their game. Others have to cement themselves somewhere in the two deep. But I think that's what makes this conversation fascinating is it's not necessarily going to be the end all be all, but depending on who breaks out or works their way into the rotation, one or the other, it's going to raise the floor or the ceiling for the team overall. That's what I think is the most intriguing about Notre Dame's defense. We talk about how they return the most production of any team in college football. A lot of that lives on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, you got CJ Carr, Anthony Knapp, Gerby Lambert, Ashton Craig, Faison, and Greathouse. After that, it's like new people are stepping into new roles, and you have to project forward a little bit more. On defense, you got Bubakar and Bryce and Jason Onye and Elijah Hughes and your 5 linebackers and Leonard Moore and Christian Gray and Breonte Johnson and Adon Schuler. The list goes on and on. But the position battles and the depths and at a couple of positions in the starting lineup, I think are going to be really interesting to watch shake out for the remainder of summer workouts and throughout fall camp.
Yep, completely agree. And the level of dominance of this defense, coming into the season and what we think they're going to be in 26 is key here because, these guys that are battling for rotation spots or potentially starting spots, you're attempting to break into a defense that is loaded, and that's the thing. And so who wins these battles means that you get to be a part of a defense that is going to be one of the nation's best. And that's why these battles are so important because, they're not just going to be giving away reps, right? I mean, it's not going to be, well, we haven't seen so-and-so on the field, so let's just get them out there. No, it's going to be how do you elevate this already elite defense? Can you elevate them? Can you take them to the next level? And that's why these battles are going to be so important and so much fun to watch once we finally get to check some things out on August 6th when we walk onto the practice field for the first time. We meaning the media as well as all the players and coaches, because that's practice number 1. So looking forward to August 6th, obviously. But until we get there, let's talk about some position battles here, Trev, and we'll do kind of what we normally do, or at least when Brian and I used to do shows, we always went front to back, and I think that's kind of what you guys do on your shows as well. So that's where we're going to start. Let's go ahead and start in the front, in the middle, starting defensive tackle. A lot of familiar names. Who starts, who doesn't, what's the rotation look like? That's where we're going to start this whole thing, Trev.
It's a really important battle going into the remainder of the offseason for a couple of different reasons. One, Chris Ash, the moment he stepped foot on Notre Dame's campus, really wanted to emphasize being strong in the run game. And we saw a vast improvement. The one thing that we can all confidently say for all the critiques, and believe me, in part 2 of today's show, we're going to be diving into the changes that we want to see on Notre Dame's defense. But for all the critiques of Chris Ash, some rightfully so, some get taken a little bit too far, he improved the rush defense. I don't think anybody can debate that. If you're looking at this team objectively and where they improved from 24 to 25. Last year, they ended as the number 11 ranked rush defense in the country. They allowed literally a hair over 100 yards a game. They were tied with Washington at 100.08 yards a game. They also finished a 10th in the country in the top 10, allowing 2.99 yards per carry. They didn't play in the postseason, but they finished tied 4th in the country in rushing touchdowns allowed. A big part of that is being stout up the middle. What does that mean? That means defensive tackles, interior linebackers, and your safeties coming down, flying into the box to make a play. When you start talking about the defensive tackle battle going into it, this is the one position on defense, the one position group, on defense where we don't necessarily know who the starters are.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't pay too much attention into who were just the first 2 guys that trot out onto the field with a position group like this. It's more so of who plays starter level snaps.
Right. And that was going to be something I was going to throw to you. Like some of these other positions we're going to talk about, if we're talking about a starting position, it matters. It matters who's out in the field first because they're getting the majority of the snaps. Does it matter at defensive tackle? That's to your point, who jogs out there first? I don't know that it matters as much because we've seen in the past and where a guy who's out there first doesn't necessarily get the majority of the snaps. Just because you're the quote unquote starter doesn't mean you're there when it matters. And so in this particular battle with some of these names, it's like, I don't know that I care who's out there first. I think I care more about who's out there with certain other people. You know what I mean? Like, who are you getting matched up with? Because a lot of times they'll do like these two tackles together or the right side together. You know what I mean? Like the three technique along with the end will be together, you know, and they'll rotate as a tandem. Like that kind of stuff, I think, is what I care more about. But again, who's going to be getting the lion's share of the snaps? That's what's going to matter at the end of the day.
I think the fascinating thing about the defensive tackle rotation this year is it could be significantly more by matchup than just these are our 1, 2, and 3 guys. You know, I think you could see a different defensive tackle rotation for when they trot out against, you know, teams like BYU, Stanford, Navy, Wisconsin. We're not going to have to wait long to see what the defensive tackle rotation is going to look like. You get your week 1 game against Wisconsin. They got in Colton Joseph, who's a mobile guy. They got in Brian Jackson and Abu Sama from the transfer portal. Those are big-bodied physical running backs, albeit it's a game that Notre Dame right now on FanDuel is favored by 19.5 points. But we're not going to have to wait that long to figure out and see, okay, who's playing what role, who fills what role, because the diverse skill set in the room, I think, dictates and gives Charlie Partridge and Chris Ash the freedom to really open it up.
And there's no point in holding anything back, I don't think, in game number 1. Like game number 1 for Notre Dame, yes, they're a big favorite on FanDuel and all, and I get that. But at the same time, this is a Big Ten team, and you're technically the home team, which still boggles my mind how Wisconsin was the home team in Chicago and Notre Dame's the home team in Wisconsin, but whatever. Yes, you're the home team, but you're going into the heart of Wisconsin. You're going to Green Bay. That's hallowed ground for anybody that enjoys cheese in Wisconsin. Like you don't hold anything back, in my opinion. You go in there with the cheese grater helmets on. You're going in there to grade some cheese, and you want your starting defensive tackles in there, and you want them, your rotation, and you want your big boys in there. You want your guys that are going to cement themselves at the beginning. And because of all the names that are involved, and tell me if you think I'm crazy here, because of all the names that are involved, I almost feel like, yeah, you're going to get a month of practice and, all of those different things. And you're going to be going up against a good offensive line in Notre Dame. We talked about that yesterday. But I also feel like who's going to be a gamer? Like who is going to come out on game day and be the dude or dudes as the case may be? And I feel like some of that's going to get worked out in the Wisconsin game, in the Rice game, Michigan State, maybe the first few trips out. And, the Wisconsin game is a legit opportunity to make some noise because this is the first time anybody's going to see this 26 team. And it's on a Sunday night where you're going up against the Ole Miss game. A lot of eyeballs are going to be on this game, and a lot of eyeballs are going to be on this defense.
Yeah, I think the names in contention, when you start talking about Jason Onye, Francis Brew, Tion Gray, Elijah Hughes, who people kind of forget to talk about because of the exciting portal additions. I get it to a degree, but at one point in time, Elijah Hughes was your most experienced returning defensive tackle on the roster back in January before Onye was granted his 6-year of eligibility before Francis Brew and Tion Gray got into the transfer portal.
Pulled Armel Mukam out of the portal back to Notre Dame, which I kind of look at as a portal addition, because he was out there and taking calls and everything else.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And to your point, Vince, you're kind of looking to see in fall camp who starts to separate themselves as the 2 to 3 guys to dominate the snaps. That's something that we've seen in recent seasons at Notre Dame. When you start thinking about the interior defensive line, Jason Onye played 354 snaps last year. Jared Dawson played 323 snaps last year. Donovan Heinisch played 310. And then after that, you started to see a drop off. Elijah Hughes played 264. Gabe Rubio played 173 before getting injured. Armel Mukam played 69. So kind of started to go a little bit lower as the season progressed. Who are your go-to guys in those crucial moments? Like this upcoming season, who are the defensive tackles that you put out on the field if you have to make a stop against Miami to prevent them from getting a field goal drive? Who are the defensive tackles that you put out onto the field that you trust to go out and execute their job at a high level if Texas A&M or the version of Texas A&M this season has to drive down the field to score to win the football game? So that's something that I'm going to be very interested to see watch unfold. I don't know who it's going to be. The lead candidates right now, I would assume, are the 4 guys that I mentioned: Jason Onye, Tion Gray, Francis Brew, and Elijah Hughes. But Vince, like we know, the defensive tackle rotation, when you factor that in, that conversation gets significantly more interesting.
Yeah, no doubt. And I would agree with you. I think those 4 are the first ones off the bench, or, first 4 guys that are probably going to have the majority of the snaps. But a lot of times you got to go deeper than 4, right? And so who is going to step up and take those kinds of snaps? And we talked about Armel Mukam. I think he is a very interesting piece of this puzzle, because, like I said, he was in the transfer portal. He was planning on leaving. And whatever the conversation was, they talked him into coming back. And if they didn't want him, you shake his hand, you give him a tush pat, and you're like, hey, thanks for everything you did. Good luck at the next spot, right? But they didn't do that. They're like, no, we want you here at Notre Dame. I have to think part of that conversation was, we want you here at Notre Dame, and you're going to play. And again, nothing is promised. Nothing, I would hope that nothing's promised to anyone, let alone Armel Mukam. But at the same time, he's going to get his opportunity. I feel like he's going to get his opportunity during practice to prove himself. He didn't come back to sit the bench, in my opinion. I don't see Notre Dame bringing him back to sit the bench as just a mythic depth piece. So he's an interesting one here for me, because right now in my head, and I think in yours as well, he's probably the 5th guy at defensive tackle. And, he's not huge. I think he's listed at, 6'3", 296. It's not small, but it's not huge either. So he's not necessarily going to be like that hole plugging guy, what that looks like. And so what is his role going to be? I think he gets every shot. I hope he takes advantage of it.
Yeah, I think a fascinating question about the defensive tackle rotation, when you look at it big picture, is just how deep will the rotation go? And I think some of that is going to be, and Armel Mukam is 100% a factor. He is one of the names, one of the guys that I would consider the 5th guy in.
Yeah.
With a strong fall camp, he might not even be the 5th guy in. Those are some of the things where he's going to have to start separating himself. And we saw in the spring that when they would trot out the first team defense, especially after Jason Onye sat out the rest of the spring with a hand injury, I believe, Armel Mukam was the first string defensive tackle. Now, I'll be curious to see how deep the rotation goes. And I think there's going to be 2 factors at play. One, who gets hurt?
Yep.
Yeah, injuries are a part of the game, and it's an unfortunate part of the game. But if previous history, very recent history, has shown us anything, some of these really key depth pieces will have to be ready to go whenever their number is called. I think back to the 2024 season. You don't have Gabriel Rubio for the start of the season, and then Jason Onye was arguably your best defensive tackle through the Louisville game. They go into a bye week. He gets off the team. Gabe Rubio kind of makes a comeback, but then that's when Riley Mills started to come out. Then for about 2 to 3 games, him and Howard Cross were a great duo, and then Howard Cross goes down with an injury, misses a few games at the end of the regular season, and is just never 100% at the end of the year. But then big old Gabe Rubio starts to step up. I still remember the play where with one arm, he bench presses Tate Ratledge, a guard at Georgia, and then brings down Frazier with the other arm. Who steps up in those moments like that for Notre Dame this year? Is it Armel Mukam? Is it Cole Mullins? Is it Sean Sevillano? Is it Davian Dixon? Does Elijah Golden make a surge as a true freshman? Because his talent really started to flash. The other piece is who forces the issue. Who forces their way onto the field through fall camp that puts Charlie Partridge and Chris Ash and Marcus Freeman in a position of, okay, like, we can't not play this guy. I don't think that any position on Notre Dame's defense, barring, like, I guess you could say Leonard Moore, where you're just going to play because you're an incumbent. Well, it's like, well, you've been on the team for 3 years, so we're just going to throw you into the starting lineup. When I look at a player like Armel Mukam, he has a lot to prove. I love his talent ceiling. Brian's told the story on this show multiple times about how, there was a scout that came, an NFL scout, came and looked and said, hey, one of your D linemen, he's have a bright future in the NFL. And they're like, oh, you talk about 95, Bryce Young? No, I'm talking about 88. I'm talking about Armel Mukam. That kid has a lot of twitch. He has great hands. He has quick feet. He's strong at the point of attack. Biggest thing for Armel Mukam is putting it together consistently for the remainder of the offseason. Same thing with Cole Mullins. That kid has bounced around from, he was a defensive end, and then he was a defensive tackle, and then they kicked him back out to end, and now he's back at defensive tackle. Now that he's going to be left here to grow, literally and figuratively, what do we see from him? Because we saw him in spurts last year. We saw him against Purdue make some plays. So that's going to be very interesting to see for the defensive tackle rotation. But some of it is going to be who forces the issue. Which one of Armel Mukum, Cole Mullins, or Sean Sevillano, or heck, Davian Dixon, Christopher Burgess, any one of those guys, who forces the issue? And that's what I'm looking forward to seeing the most.
Absolutely. And defensive line, I think, is very similar to me to the wide receiver room to a degree. We know there's a bunch of talent there. It's just, how's it going to shake out? And I it's kind of where the similarities end, but that's the first one that came to my mind. Sure. I think we agree there's talent in the wide receiver room. There's some proven talent, same as the defensive tackle room. But how's it going to shake out? What's the rotation going to be? But at the end of the day, I think we're both very confident that whatever it is, somebody's going to have to beat out somebody else. And if that's the case, then they're going to be really good. Like, it's the whole iron sharpens iron thing, and who's going to end up on top, and, the king of the hill kind of a deal. But, like, I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't care who ends out up top, because whoever it is beat out all these other guys. And so that means they're really good.
Yeah, the thing that I am confident in saying, and it sounds like you are as well, is whoever earns a spot in the rotation, it will be keyword earned.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not, well, you were just the shiniest of the most unimpressive players of this bunch, so we're going to play you by default. It will be earned. Whoever earns the spot in the rotation. I'm with you completely.
So that's what I'm excited about there. So let's move outside just a hair, and let's talk about a little defensive. Well, no, we don't need to talk about defensive end because we kind of know what's going on there. Let's talk about Will. We'll go back a step. We'll talk about the Will linebacker spot. And this is an interesting one because, the linebacker spot right now it's loaded. We know who's going to start at Mike. We've talked about that a million times in Drake Bowen and where he lands and what he looks like nationally and all those different things. But what is going to happen at Will? Because this is a situation to me, Trev, and you tell me what you think, but to me, the Will position is there's like 3 or 4 guys for one spot. And all of those guys can play the spot, and I think they can play it at a high level. But how are they going to use it? Is there going to be a rotation there? Is it going to be one guy the majority of the time? Are they going to have 3 guys that kind of rotate between the 2 positions, for example? What is this going to look like? But the Will is an intriguing spot right now.
Yeah, it is. I have not been shy. Really, it's the inverse. I've been very bullish about Notre Dame's linebacking core this year. I would stack it up against all 137 other FBS teams at the Division I level. And because I'm a firm believer that no other team returns its entire rotating 5 and both of their starting middle interior linebackers. Drake Bowen obviously comes back, and Jaden Ausberry started the final 10 games of the regular season after Jalen Sneed started the first 2 games of the regular season. Will is intriguing, and it's almost like they're in a similar spot as where they were last year. Because I remember having this conversation, and honestly might have been with you and Brian in one of these summer shows last year of like, how does this shake out? And in one light, we discussed about how it's like, hey, does it matter because they're all going to play? But then on the other hand, it's like, it does kind of matter because is it going to be opponent-based? Is it going to be matchup-based? Is it going to be somebody just separates so much to where they're just the clear number 1 at Will? What do we see from Kingston? And I think going into this season, Kingston's injury adds a completely new dynamic to this conversation. I don't know who's going to emerge at Will linebacker. That is another battle that I'm very interested to see how it shakes out, especially now that they have a new position coach in Brian John Marie.
Sure.
Max Bulla very easily could have just rolled the footballs out again and said, hey, Drake and Jaden Ausberry are starting, but between Sneed, KVA, when he's back to full health, and Madden Frama will all play at least 15 to 20 snaps a game. What does that rotation now look like with Kingston working back to full health? I think there's a lot of people that see, okay, he might be cleared to go for the start of fall camp. Does not mean that he's going to be, quote unquote, 100% for the game against Wisconsin.
Right.
100% healthy, maybe. Mitch Evans was 100% healthy against Texas A&M at the start of the 2024 season, but he wasn't 100% himself until Virginia in 2024 when he was starting to make plays after the catch. And unfortunately, we never saw him get back to who he was in 2023 when he was just on that tear against Ohio State and Duke. But when I look at the will linebacker position, they have a lot of talented candidates in the discussion. You got Jaden Ausberry, who started, like I said, the final 10 games of the regular season last year. You get Kingston, Sneed, and a player to not count out is Madden Faramo. I mean, I remember we were sitting up top at the spring practice, first day of spring in 2025. And I was watching Madden Faramo move around. It's like, that kid moves a little bit different than some of the other very talented players in the room, but sometimes it would be to the complete wrong gap. Or sometimes he would be fitting in the complete wrong direction. And I was like, but the moment the light bulb turns on for him, he's going to be very difficult to keep off the field in meaningful snaps. And that took until the Purdue game. What if he makes that level of stride this offseason? Does he make a push for more snaps in the rotation above other players? What role does Kingston's injury play in that? I think will is a fascinating discussion.
It is a fascinating discussion. And I think, ideally in my head, if everybody's healthy, I start KVA and Bowen next door to each other, and then you rotate and you have different packages for different guys and, that kind of a deal. But that's not reality right now, right? Because KVA is on the shelf for X amount of time. We don't know. But that'll be the first thing I'm looking for on, August 6th. Is he running out with everybody? But at the same time, they're not going to be in pads. So he could easily run out and it means nothing, So what does that rotation look like? Who is actually starting? Is it going to be a true rotation? And where, similar to the defensive tackle position, doesn't matter who rolls out there first. It matters who's out there when it matters. You know what I mean? And so do you see, if you were a betting man, do you see it being more like somebody's going to hold the starting position and kind of be the guy there? Or do you see more of a rotation because of the depth of talent, in this room and the different characteristics of each of one of these linebackers, I think kind of gets into this conversation as well.
Yeah, I think there will be like a proverbial starter that rolls out along with Drake Bowen every single week. I mean, last year, like I said, we saw what Jaden Ausberry did. Here's the numbers according to Pro Football Focus. Drake Bowen led all linebackers with 585 snaps played. He started all 12 games. Jaden Ausberry started the final 10 games of the regular season and played 437. Kingston did not start a single game in 2025, I believe, according to Pro Football Focus. I'm double checking. Excuse me. I'm sorry. He started 2 games. He started against Boise State and started against Boston College, where they came out in a traditional 4-3, where they had 3 down linebackers. Yep. Having said that, that didn't mean that Jaden Ausberry didn't start. He started alongside.
Right.
And Kingston only played 2 less snaps. Jalen Sneed still played over 300 snaps last year, despite only starting against Miami and Texas A&M. So I think that it's still going to be that deeper rotation. The only difference is I think Madden Faramo is going to end up playing more than 144 snaps on defense.
He's going to start stealing some of those snaps from those other guys.
Yeah, especially with Kingston's injury at the front. Like, look, if Notre Dame is in a position where they need Kingston Viliamasa to play to beat Wisconsin, Rice, Michigan State, Purdue, North Carolina, and Stanford, we have bigger issues than just who's the starting will linebacker. I mean, those problems get significantly deeper than just who's your starting will. I do think Jaden Ausberry kind of just assumes that role, but the one where I think the rotation will start to get shaken up is around October 17th when they play BYU. Kingston was also used last year to spell Drake at middle linebacker. After Jaden Ausberry spent the spring as the number 1 defense's middle linebacker with Drake and Kingston and Madden and Kahanu Kia out for the spring, will we see Jaden Ausberry start to spell Drake Bowen at Mike? Will we see some situations where it's Jaden Ausberry and Kingston on the field? How much will we see Drake Bowen and Kingston on the field together? If they need a breather in certain games, do you roll Jaden Ausberry and Jalen Sneed out together like we saw in the spring and in the blue gold game? Here's the good news. They're all viable options.
Right. Exactly.
There's none of those combinations. And Vince, you can correct me if I'm wrong. When I read off any of those combinations of what you could roll out there, to me, none of them were like, oh, yeah, you could, but don't keep Drake off the field for too long. Or, oh, you could do that, but don't keep KVA off the field for too long.
No, completely agree. And it's a situation of those are intriguing combinations to me. And those are in combinations that I would want to investigate during fall camp to see how they look and how those guys play next to each other and all of those types of things, because it changes your defense a little bit, right? When you adjust the combinations at linebacker, it changes your defense, hopefully for the better, depending on matchups and things like that. And so I think they have a lot of options here, and I think they're all positive options. This isn't a case of, well, whoever starts, guess we'll see what happens. That kind of a thing. It's like, okay, well, you could put so-and-so with so-and-so and be fine and do these different things. And this combination can do this better than this combination against this offense and, things of that nature. And so I'm excited about the linebackers, but I also think it's important to get a guy like Madden Framo on the field because he could be the guy next year, depending on who takes off and graduates and all of those different things.
Yeah, without a doubt. When I think of the linebacker rotation, one thing that I'll be paying attention to for each player in fall camp, because it's easy for us to sit here and just be like, elevate your game and be a part of the rotation. For Kingston, name of the game is easy. Get back to being healthy. Get back to being healthy, stay healthy, because Kingston has yet to go through a complete season and play all 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 games. As a freshman in 2024, he missed some time with a knee injury. Came back for the playoffs, was never 100%. And then obviously he missed the tail end of the regular season last year. And he wasn't one of those players that was like, yeah, but if they make the playoffs, we might see him. No, he tore his ACL. He was out. He was going to be out regardless. For Jaden Ausberry, it's continue growing in that leadership role. I think of how valuable it would be for Notre Dame's defense to have multiple middle linebacker types of players on the field. So it's not just Drake Bowen barking out orders and getting everybody lined up. If Jaden Ausberry is able to help with that too. Jalen Steed and Madden Framo, it's finding that level of consistent play. Jalen Sneed is coming off of the best spring that he's had in South Bend since his arrival, and it's not coming at a better time. He's a fifth-year senior. Right. Does that vault him into having more snaps? And then Framo, the talent is there, the skill set is there. He has all the physical tools. Now it's just about finding that consistent level of play, and he's going to be almost impossible to keep off the field.
Yeah, great problem to have at linebacker for sure, and I'm excited to see how it plays out. Let's switch our attention to the back end, and corner is a spot that is interesting right now because you're going to have probably a different starter at field than there was last year, and you're probably going to have a different starter at nickel than there was last year. But the same names are going to be involved, along with some transfers, and so corner is a very intriguing position when it comes to who's starting at field, who's starting at nickel. I think we can all agree that we know the starter at the boundary. But
we do.
Yeah, I mean, just going out on a limb, it's penciled in.
Okay, fair enough. He was okay.
Yeah. There's this Moore kid that came in.
He's a 3-star. I care more about blue chip ratio, dog.
I hear you. I get it. Paper champion. But the other two positions, while I think we can actually get the pencil out and maybe pencil in some guys, but at the same time, are they going to get pushed by maybe some of these younger guys?
The fascinating thing about Notre Dame secondary is you, me, Brian, a large contingency of our live chat, several people on the premium message boards, and a lot of national outlets say that Notre Dame has the best returning secondary in the country. What's funny about that is two of their three starting corner spots are kind of up for debate. And that is what I think is interesting. It's Notre Dame is in such a good spot as far as the talent on their roster that we can say that they have the most talented secondary in the country, and their starting lineup at corner has yet to be ironed out. To your point, Leonard Moore is the bona fide starter at the boundary. They bring in DJ McKinney from the transfer portal to seemingly be Christian Gray's heir apparent at field corner because Christian Gray's getting bumped inside the nickel. I don't think that those two will be competing directly. I don't see a world where they brought in DJ McKinney to try to play nickel. I just don't think his game suits him there. He's 6'2". He's 185 pounds. He's a long coverage player. I don't see him being sent off the edge or providing as much support in the run game as what nickels have done before in the past. But when I start looking at their competition specifically, Christian Gray at nickel and DJ McKinney at the field, are they able to lock those down? It's not a foregone conclusion that DJ McKinney is going to be the starter at field. And I can promise you that when Mike Mickens had the initial conversations, and now that Aaron Henry is here and Marcus Freeman and Chris Ash, they did not promise DJ McKinney anything. He said, hey, you're walking into the most talented secondary in the country. You have to earn the spot here. They moved Christian Gray inside to nickel. Yes, he's a 2-year starter, but it was not a foregone conclusion. It's like, hey, we're going to kick you inside to the slot, and you're just going to be the starter. Because we saw this spring before his injury, Dallas Golden came to compete at both spots. And he's one of the players and one of those younger players, to your point, that I could see pushing him. We saw Jaden Sanders play all 3 positions in spring. I watched him take reps at field. He was the starting boundary corner with the first team defense when Leonard Moore sat out of the blue gold game. And we also watched him take reps at nickel. And so what role does he play? Then obviously you have to start talking about Mark Zachary as well. Last year as a true freshman, he started in 3 games. He and Dallas Golden combined to play for, I believe, I'm trying to find Mark Zachary. Yeah, they combined to play 618 snaps last year as true freshman. What role does he play in the defense? What role does he play? Does he make a push? And so all of those things factored together, I'm interested to see what happens. The freshmen were also impressive. Now, I'll say this, and Vince, you can disagree with me if you see it differently. I don't know if any of the true freshmen are going to push to start this year, barring an injury. I was very impressed with what I saw from Aiden Pouncey. I think Chaz Smith is about a year away from making legitimate contributions, but I won't count him out either. And we just have yet to see Kari Adams. So the talent in the 26 class is exceptional. I don't know if I'm ready to say that they could compete for a starting spot, yo.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, especially considering the talent just in the class above them is so good and got a bunch of reps last year, to your point. And I think that means something because the secondary last year was really good and they still got reps, right? I mean, they still combined for over 600 reps, and that makes a difference. I know experience isn't the be all end all. I get it, but there's a reason they got on the field last year and perform the way that they did. And so I think those 3 guys that you mentioned, Sanders, Golden, Zachary, I think all 3 of those guys, are going to push every one of the guys that are currently penciled in as starters. And B, I think they're also going to get a bunch of playing time this coming season, maybe in a rotational kind of a situation. Maybe they get a series here, a series there when the game is still in doubt, but they're also going to get a bunch of time in the second half of a bunch of these games. And that's only going to help Notre Dame in the future, obviously. And again, you're not just going to play guys, obviously, right? They earned playing time last year. I feel like they're going to earn playing time this year as well. I'm not ready to go out on a limb and say that they're going to steal the starting spot, but there could be more rotation this year than maybe there's been in the past as well. I could see that being the case. Maybe it's a 2/3, 1/3, that kind of a deal. I don't know what that looks like, and I'm very intrigued to watch what is happening in fall camp. What's the rotation look like? What positions are they going to be at? We've seen Golden at multiple positions, Sanders at multiple positions. So I think it's going to be fun to watch. I think those guys are going to push. I think they are going to push the starters. If you're putting a gun to my head, obviously I think McKinney and I think that, Gray are going to be the 2 starters along with Moore. And then those other 3 guys are just going to be right there. And I don't think Notre Dame's going to be afraid to put them in the game when it matters.
Nor should they. I mean, look, in an ideal world, I don't really want to see Leonard Moore in the second half against Rice.
Exactly, 100%.
I don't. If DJ McKinney and Christian Gray win the starting jobs at field and nickel, I don't want to see Christian Gray or DJ McKinney in the second half against Purdue.
Yeah.
Ideal state. Now, we had to see it a little bit last year because they gave up 24 freaking first half points to Purdue last year when they played them. Different conversation for, I guess, part 2 of today's show. But when I start looking at the overall depth, that kind of leads us into the next talking point here with the corners is who steps up to be the next man in. The boundary position is a complete opposite conversation of where it's at in the starting lineup. We said, hey, boundaries locked down. It's Leonard Moore, unanimous All-American as a sophomore. He's the number 1 returning cornerback in the country. ESPN had him listed as the top returning just defender in college football, not just the top defensive back or the top corner. Top defender. He was ranked ahead of Colin Simmons at Texas. High praise from ESPN, something that I don't get to say a whole lot about Notre Dame and ESPN. But when you start talking about the depth, I think the depth at boundary, in my eyes, is wide open. I think that there is this general belief, and it's a well-founded belief that Kari Adams is just going to be the heir apparent in the boundary and be Leonard Moore's backup. Here's the facts of the matter. He's a very talented kid, and I believe he was one of the highest-ranked defensive recruits on Brian's IB recruiting big board. I mean, he was up there with Joey O'Brien and Rodney Dunham, and so very high praise. We also haven't seen him yet. He had to get work done on a pre-existing labrum injury. That's why he had to sit out in the spring. Sounds like he'll be back for fall camp. But the next time we see Kari Adams out on the field in a Notre Dame uniform will be the first time we see Kari Adams out on the field in a Notre Dame uniform. So could he insert himself as the number 2 guy? Yeah, that is the one true freshman that I'm confident in saying could insert himself into the 2 deep. But we also saw Jaden Sanders play that position. Does he back up at boundary until Kari Adams is ready? Who's the backup at nickel? I loved what I saw from Dallas Golden.
Yeah.
I loved what I saw from him. Is it a situation where Dallas Golden's emergence, who I believe is one of the catalysts of Notre Dame's defense, if his emergence means that he's pushing Christian Gray, does that allow Christian Gray to spell both DJ McKinney and Dallas Golden to the field side at nickel and at field corner? I don't know. What about Nick Reddish? Is he able to come back healthy? I don't know if he's able to do that this season, but what if he comes back healthy? I loved what I saw from him. Who else makes that push in the nickel? And then at field corner, that's the one that I'm the most confident in that the 2 deep will shake itself out. Between Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, Aiden Pouncey, Christian Gray, depending on how the starting lineup shakes out. Field, I think they're set. The most questions that I have is who steps up in the boundary behind Leonard Moore.
Love it. Love it. I do want to talk about safety before we wrap this thing up. Obviously, there's no competition for who's going to be starting at safety. Both guys return. They're both pretty decent. And so not really a conversation there. The conversation is going to be next man up who, because they do rotate at safety, right? We all know that Luke Talich is going to be a dude. He could be starting at probably, if there's 138 D1 teams, I'd say 135. And I don't know who the 3 would be that he wouldn't start at. That's my comment on Luke Talich. So he's going to be the number 3 man. I'd like to see them, at times work a little 3 safety action, maybe bring somebody down in the box like Luke, playing, more of a box player, things like that. Maybe a la, Kyle Hamilton's freshman year when, he was working his way in. They did some 3 safety stuff. I think that could be a lot of fun. So we know that Luke is going to be there. The bigger question is who fills that 4th safety spot across from Luke when it's quote unquote the second team, when they run the 2s out there, who's going to be across from Luke Talich? What are your thoughts kind of initially, and then how this thing could shake out?
Well, the fact of the matter is Notre Dame's safety room is one injury away from the depth starting to look real shaky. And you never game plan. You never predict an injury, but you also can't not game plan for an injury, I guess, if that makes sense. And what we know is Tay Johnson has had health problems in his career. He struggled staying healthy during his true freshman season in 2024. He missed the final 2 games of the regular season in 25 with a hand injury. So you start to turn your attention to, okay, you had Jalen Stroman against Syracuse. Who is that this year? Because you still had Luke Talich in last year's team. Talich, that came off weird. You still had Luke Talich in last year's team. But when I start looking at who needs to emerge, you start and turn your attention to Ethan Long and Joey O'Brien. Joey O'Brien has been the hot name, and he was a 5-star recruit coming in. And, I mean, he blew me away in his first collegiate practice. He was lockstep with Mylan Graham, who was running a corner route, was in his hip pocket the entire time, had a pass breakup in his first collegiate practice as a true freshman against somebody coming in from Columbus. That's impressive. Can he build on that? Unfortunately, he wasn't able to finish the spring, which paved the way for Ethan Johnson, who, let's be real about something, kind of started to get passed up a little bit by Joey O'Brien in the performance he was putting on in spring training. Ethan Long is one of the players that I believe, along with like Blake Hebert on the offensive side of the ball, needed to finish spring off on a strong note. And I think he did that. He's one of those players similar to Luke Towson. Like he's kind of always around the football. You know, Ethan Long, in some of the few moments that I've met him, he had 2 interceptions on one drive against Syracuse. People want to talk, well, it was against their backups. Like, yeah, it was a true freshman playing on senior day. So, yeah, it was against their backups. He was the 5th string safety last year. That's impressive nonetheless. Then this year in the spring game, gets another interception on a tip ball action. So he's somebody that enters fall camp while Joey O'Brien is still rehabbing and coming back. I don't know his timeline for return. It could be sometime during fall camp. It could be sometime in the first month of the season. I don't know. But what I do know is that either one of those guys is going to have to be ready to go. Notre Dame last year played a 4-man safety rotation between Adon, Brayante, Luke Talich, and Jalen Stroman. They don't have to play 4 safeties this year. They more so played them last year because 4 guys earned the opportunity to play. Who earns the opportunity to play this year? That is something I'm going to be interested in.
Yeah, because a year from now, we're going to be having a completely different conversation about safety. Because I think the top 3 guys could be gone. You know, maybe Luke sticks it out for another year, you know, depending on whatever, you know, the situation. And I mean, he's a senior. I believe he'll have another year because of the 5 for 5 and all that fun stuff. But, you know, who's going to start next year? So whoever becomes the second string safety, you know, that's not the be all end all for who's going to start next year, obviously. But at the same time, it doesn't hurt. You know, it doesn't hurt giving you a leg up and how things go. And we know they're going to go 4 safeties at some point or another. We know that you know, whoever gets that 4th spot is going to get playing time, and so and playing time when it matters. And so, who's that going to be? What's that going to look like? It's going to be a lot of fun to watch for sure on the back end, because again, as I mentioned, in the defense as a whole, you know, whoever has the opportunity and the ability to break into the rotation, no matter what position it's at, is going to have an opportunity to play on elite defense. And the same thing happens at safety and corner, right? That, you know, this is the best secondary in the country, arguably. It's a fun argument to have because I think Notre Dame comes out on top when you have that argument. But though that's going to be the argument, right? Best secondary in football, and now you're a part of it. And so the competition is going to be fierce in the fall. And I love this is where the depth of this roster, and we talk about the depth all the time, this is where the depth really comes into play. Every one of these starters is being pushed, and every one of these starters has the opportunity to potentially lose their job, maybe with the exception of Drake Bowen and Leonard Moore, right? But they're all going to be pushed, and it's going to make them better. It's going to make whoever the starter is better. And same thing with the 2 deep. You get into the 2 deep, you're being pushed, you're going to push. And so just love where this team is defensively and the talent level and the depth and, you know, the way that they will be able to sustain setbacks because of the depth of this roster is very exciting. And we're going to see that firsthand in the fall for sure.
Very well said. And I figured, since we have the special teams guy on here today, we don't talk a lot of special teams on the show, but I believe that we would all be remiss if we didn't talk about another important position battle that's going to be going on. And it's the punter battle between Eric Schmidt and Jasper Scaife. I think that is something that's going to be very intriguing to watch as well, because I mean, Notre Dame's punter last year, and I don't know why his name is escaping me. I can see his face. James Rundell.
There you go.
Good Lord. James Rundell had a heck of a season last year. He did. And it goes on very much untalked about. And they're entering a season now where they have to replace a 2-year punter. Vince, I'm kicking this all to you, brother. Special teams, punter battle. Let's hear it.
Well, look, it is going to come down to those 2 guys. And I think that, you know, they tried to make Schmidt into a kicker last year, and it didn't go over super well. Now, the kid has talent. The kid has a big leg. There's no doubt about it. The way they went about trying to make him a kicker was not great. I interviewed him in the spring when they had the special teams guys out there, and they had little placards and name cards in front of each guy, and it said that he was a punter. And I think that's the best spot for him. Now, he's not going to forget how to kick. He can still back up the kicking spot, you know, that kind of a deal, but he's a punter. And punter was always his main deal in high school and on the circuit, the recruiting circuit, excuse me, and all of those things. The kid's got a big leg. He's a very good punter. It's a very, very, very good punter. And I was a little surprised they went out and got Jasper Scaife, although, we know that Marty Biaggi is obsessed with Australian punters. And so I don't know if it's just he likes the free family vacation to Australia or what the case may be, but he loves those the Aussie punters. What worries me is that he has zero experience as far as being in an American football game like that. That is what worries me. I know that Schmidt can kick in a football game. I've seen him do it from a punting standpoint. He's very good at it, and he'll be just fine if he ends up winning it. If Jasper Scaife wins it, that means he's really good, because that means that he beat out Schmidt. And so I'm not worried about the punting situation. And there is going to be a competition, I would hope. Schmidt told me himself, he said that there was it's an open competition. That's what he said in the spring. And that's what the coaches expect. And so, I'm excited to see what that looks like. I believe Jasper Scaife has a big leg, which is awesome. Punting isn't just about having a big leg, though. It's also about putting it where it needs to go and, coffin corners and all those different kinds of things. And so I think that Schmidt may be the more polished punter, but maybe Jasper Scaife has gotten to the point where, he can do all of those things. We'll just have to wait and see. His first game, if he's the starter, is going to be, in Green Bay, Wisconsin at Lambeau Field. Not as intimidating as going down to Texas A&M, which is what James Rendell had to do. And it wasn't good, right? It wasn't good. And then you put on top of that the fact that Marty Biaggi was asking him to do things that he wasn't really all that good at, rolling out and doing some of that. So hopefully we hear more and we see more about these guys being asked to do what they do best. And when they just let Rendell kick from the pocket, he was fantastic. And so hopefully, whoever wins the job is able to do, be their best player and do what they're best at. But either way, I think both these guys have big legs, and hopefully they make the right decision on who that'll be. But I also think that Schmidt will back up potentially both positions. If he doesn't win the punting position, he can back up both positions and be just fine. And then on a side note, Spencer Porath is a great kicker. Nobody has to worry about kicking anymore, at least while he's there. He's very, very good. And I would encourage anybody that's worried about it to go watch some of his kicks while he was at Purdue. He was the lone bright spot at Purdue, and he'll be just fine at Notre Dame, and he'll be here for the next 2 years, maybe 3.
Love it.
All right, Trev, let's jump into show number 2 and let's move the conversation to what we would like to see changed, or, not necessarily changed, but, changes that we would like to see on the defensive side of the football. And, I want you to be able to set this up, because you kind of talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the show, but I want you to be able to set this show up and kind of the direction that we're going to head in it, because there are some people out there that are going to take it from a little bit too broad, a little bit too easy of a way to go about things. And so, I want you to set up how this show is going to look and kind of what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time this offseason talking about some of the things that we need to see changed on the defensive side of the ball. And gosh, we spend ample amounts of time talking about what Chris Ash should have done, what we did see him do, and what we didn't see him do. Basically, what we're doing in this part of the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, is we're going to be talking about the changes and adjustments that we want to see moving forward. Now, look, we hear a lot of be who you were the final 7 games of the regular season. And that'd be a very, especially us here, thus the name, Irish Breakdown, be a very lazy take of just do that. And thank you for coming to the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by FanDuel, right?
Thanks for hanging out with us. Appreciate it.
Exactly. Wear your seatbelt, drive safe, all that stuff. What does that look like, though? What were those changes from last year that we wanted to see? Now, we kind of separate this conversation into 2 different buckets, and we're talking more big picture philosophical changes we want to see on defense. Then we're going to get into more schematic changes. Now, I don't know if either of us are going to be able to talk through the in-depth X's and O's to the degree that Brian can. That's just the special skill that he has. And I'm going to apologize right now that I'm not going to be able to live up to that degree of what he's able to do. That's why Irish Breakdown is what it is. But when you start talking about what the Notre Dame defense has to change, you need to start up top. And changes are different than improvements. It's similar to what we talked about in yesterday's show. It's not what we want to see changes. It'll be better on third down. There's a piece of that, but we're going to dive into the why. We're going to dive into the what goes into that, not just, hey, they need to improve from the 11th best rush defense in the country to the third. That is more of an improvement. The changes that we want to see are more so philosophical and schematic. And Vince, the first one, pretty simple, is you got to be more aggressive. That is what we saw in the final 7 games. That shifted how Notre Dame's defense went from being statistically one of the worst in the country to one of the best in the country, is they were more aggressive overall. And as long as we start to see that, I think this defense is going to start off the season hot.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, this defense is put together to be an aggressive defense. I mean, this is not a defense. This is not a personnel to sit back and allow everything to stay in front, and play just a passive defense. We've seen that. We've seen these guys try to play that way, and it's just not who they are. And so this is a prime example, in my opinion, of you want to adjust your scheme to benefit the personnel that you have on your roster. And right now, the personnel that is on this roster, it's a set of personnel that wants to be aggressive. They want to fly to the football. They want to dictate the manner in which this game is being played. And I think that that's how this defense can be elite. This is how they can be the top level of themselves and be the best version of themselves, is to be aggressive, right? Not recklessly aggressive, but be aggressive within the scheme of things. And I'm hoping that, Chris Ash knows that. And after a year of being at the helm of this defense, we see that right out the gate in game number 1.
It needs to happen. I'm with you 100%. So what does being more aggressive look like philosophically? And no, guys, it's not about they need to blitz on every play. You got to send 7 or 8 guys every single play. It's how you attack your scheme. That is how. It's things like, think about run fits. We talked about the importance of the defensive tackle room in the first part of today's show. Well, the linebackers and the way that Chris Ash sets up his defense are meant to fit off of the defensive tackle. So what that means, and Brian explained it on a show a couple of days ago, I believe, is in Al Golden's defense, it was, hey, you're asking the defensive tackles to penetrate A gap, and you just have the linebackers flow to the B gap, and that is their assignment. Whereas now in Chris Ash's defense, it's the linebackers are sitting back and waiting to read, and their read is based off of what the defensive tackles ultimately elect to do. If you're asking a defensive tackle or a 3-tech to 2-gap all day, do it aggressively. We saw consistently over the course of the regular season, they would just kind of sit, they would kind of stop their feet at the point of attack and then not fill a certain gap, which is why we saw a lapse in production overall with the linebackers in the first couple of games of the season. I'll dive more into what that looks like, and I'll dive more into what the stats look like after they started to really flow and work as a defense. But though that's some of the aggressive tendencies that we want to see. That doesn't mean sit back and send 8 guys on every single 3rd and 8.
Right.
Mix up how you get after the quarterback. Mix up how you're able to rush the passer with just 4. Mix up your coverages, disguise blitzes. Those are all things that I believe need to be from the top down, because this is where this conversation stems, Vince. It's hard for Notre Dame to do the things that they want to do on defense without having an aggressive philosophy. This has turned into a man versus zone conversation with a massive populace of the fan base. You can win national titles playing zone coverage. Indiana did it.
Sure.
Ohio State did it. Texas made it to the college football playoff semifinals while holding Jeremiah Smith to 1 catch for like 6 yards, covering him in zone. But they did it aggressively. We'll dive more into those things too, but that's where you have to start at up top. You have to be more aggressive with what you do. You have to be willing to.
Yep, completely agree with that. And I think that another piece of that is you also have to be willing to make personnel changes in the moment and not wait till after the game. You know, if you're playing the proper defense, you're playing the way that, all of us want to see, and a guy just is not cutting it, you got to be willing to make those changes, right? I mean, we just got done talking about position battles and, how, our iron sharpens iron and all these different things. They've got talent, they can do it. Be willing to make that change. If a guy just isn't cutting it that day, be willing to put somebody else in the game. Like, don't cut off your nose to spite your face. You know what I'm saying? Like, that you've got to be willing to make some moves and do it to the benefit of your team and your defense, and not have to worry about, what that player is going to think. But, he's not doing the job. You got to put somebody else in that's willing to do the job.
We saw multiple examples early on in the regular season of Notre Dame not willing to make adjustments in the moment. What does that mean? And there's a conversation going on right now in the chat about Christian Gray, something that we'll dive into later on, either in the mailbag or honestly probably later on in this segment. What does it mean to make schematic changes in the moment, personnel changes in the moment? That does not mean the second that somebody gives up a bad play, you sit them on the bench next to you and they never see the field again for the rest of the game. What this does mean, however, is you can't have a repeat of the first two games, especially last season. I don't know what it was that Notre Dame's defensive back coach Mike Mickens and Chris Ash and Marcus Freeman saw in Dallas Golden in the week of Purdue that they didn't see in the week of practice for Texas A&M to leave Carson Hobbs on an island against Mario Craven. Those are the type of things that I'm talking about. Making personnel, be willing to go against, well, this is just our starting lineup, so we have to keep them out there. You have to be willing to make those changes. And they made it too late against Texas A&M. It wasn't until the final drive of the game against Texas A&M that they elected to match up Leonard Moore with Mario Craven. And it was already after he had over 200 yards receiving. It's too late. You have to be able to make those schematic changes. I don't know why Tay Johnson only played 9 snaps against Miami. He played 56 against Texas A&M. What did he show you in that week and a half, given the bye week, that you weren't willing to play him against Miami, but then you were willing to play him in bulk against Texas A&M at home? Those are some of the things that Notre Dame needs to do better, making schematic change, making personnel changes in the moment. That's what I mean by that.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And, again, having a year under their belt, or I should say Chris Ash having a year under his belt with all of these players, hopefully will make a difference when it comes to personnel decisions and knowing his roster and things like that. But then again, at the same time, every position coach is different now from last year. And so what does that look like, and how does that affect, the play and the philosophy and, all of those kinds of things? I wouldn't say it worries me, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on, right? With all these new position coaches. Let's talk a little bit more schematic when it comes to the defense and kind of what we would like to see. I know you wanted to talk about, third and long and things of that nature. So I'm going to pass it off to you and let you talk about third downs.
Some of the most frustrating plays that I saw from Notre Dame's defense last year were on money down situations. Third and long where they got to get off the field. Really, third down in general, I didn't like a lot of what they were doing schematically. What didn't we like about it? Well, let's dive into it. There were a lot of times on 3rd and 5. Sticks were 5 yards away. Corners were at 7 yards depth. Why? Couldn't tell you. Way too passive. That's where this whole man versus zone philosophy gets a lot of bad reputation. You could play zone. Why are you lining up at 7 yards depth when they only need 5? That is just asking to give away a first down. That is the literal definition of a bend but don't break type of defense. One thing that Notre Dame did a really good job of last year was their red zone defense. So when you start looking at the opportunities in the red zone, Notre Dame was number 1 in the country in the fewest amount of red zone trips allowed. I think that's fantastic. Unfortunately, they also ranked 47th in the country in red zone touchdown percentage allowed. So it's when they did get there, they scored over 56% of the time. So that is an area of improvement. I know we're not necessarily talking about that in this show, but one thing that I want to see on third down specifically is you need to have tighter coverage. That doesn't mean run press man on 3rd and 17. That doesn't mean you have to run press coverage on any short third down distance either. I wouldn't hate that, but you need to be able to play tighter coverage in third and long. They were bad on third down last year. So it's kind of an improvement, but what we're focusing on really is why it wasn't good. Why it wasn't good is you were giving up way too much ground before. It is going to be unacceptable this year for me if you're going into a 3rd and 8 situation and your corners are sitting at 11 yards of depth on the off chance that you might get beaten 30 yards downfield. You have to stop what's most dangerous. How many times did Miami in the season opener run a quick little whip route, a whip out on 3rd and 4?
Or a hitch or anything
or a
like
hitch.
That. Yeah.
Because the corners were sitting at 7, 8 yards of depth.
Yeah.
You need tighter coverage in third and long. That is a schematic change that absolutely, and that's not getting into, play more cover 2 or cover 3 or cover 1. Just in general, tighter coverage on third and long, and you're going to stop giving up some of those just easy third down conversions.
Well, and to kind of branch off of tighter coverage on third down, another piece of the puzzle here is just the aggressiveness of the secondary, and using their hands, being more physical at the point of attack, rerouting, routes and things of that nature. I know you wanted to talk about that as well. Definitely something that's frustrating. The free releases has been a frustration for like 20 years. Watching Notre Dame football, and they have personnel that can take advantage of this, in an aggressive way. And it's not just being aggressive for being aggressive sake. It's throwing off the timing of the offense. It's, doing all of these different things to limit the effectiveness of the offense. They've got the personnel to do it. Just like to see them do it a little bit more.
Without a doubt, one of the biggest aspects of playing zone aggressively, and when people hear aggressive zone, they think of, like a nickel fire. It's like, well, it's an aggressive zone because they blitz somebody. No, it's an aggressive zone because you're getting hands-on receivers. You're not allowing as many free releases. What does that mean? In the blue gold game, there was a play where Mylan Graham caught a seam route. And I think it was after the defense jumped off sides, and I think CJ elected to rip a seam route over the middle of the field. Christian Gray was sitting at nickel. He did not get his hands on Mylan Graham in any way to try to reroute him. And to your point, Vince, throw off the timing of the overall route. That is a major issue. Last year I saw somebody earlier in the chat post something about, Mark Zachary, and he's nervous about him. He gave up some big plays last year. One, he was a true freshman. It was early in the season. Right. Different conversation for a different day. But here's why I bring this up. It wasn't just Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary who were true freshmen. It wasn't just Carson Hobbs, who was a redshirt freshman, allowing these. We saw veterans making these issues or making these mistakes. We saw Leonard Moore not getting hands on players in zone. We saw Christian Gray, who was a second-year starter, not getting his hands on receivers to reroute them. This is a systemic issue from top to bottom, and I don't think it was as simple as, well, Mike Mickens just didn't want to teach it in 2025. No, I don't think it's that. Brian says it all the time, when it is an issue with one player, it's the player. When it's an issue with a room, it's the coach. And those are some of the things that we saw last year with them not being able to reroute. It wasn't just mistakes by young players. You're putting yourself in a bad spot, and you're leaving your safeties out on an island when you're not willing to reroute some of these defenders because you're looking to either read what the quarterback is doing, your eyes are locked in the backfield for too long. All of those things become issues when you start talking about this passive zone that they're playing. Again, I have no issue if Chris Ash wants to run cover 3 and cover 2 and cover 4 all day, but do it aggressively. Teach it the correct way. Reroute wide receivers. Get your hands on defenders. Those are some of the things that I want to see.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And, the biggest misconception out there is that playing zone means you can't be aggressive. It means it's passive. Like that is the biggest misconception out there. You can play zone and still be very aggressive. You can be a flat defender as a corner and still get hands-on and reroute guys and do all the things that you would do in a press man situation. You can do that. It's not passive. Now, they played it passive, and that was super frustrating, but you can't always go man either. And so you are going to have to go zone. And when you do go zone, you've got to be aggressive with it. You've got to be hands-on. You've got to be physical. And that's just runs with the territory. And they did that later on in the season. That's the thing. So it's not like They can't do it. It's not like they refuse to do it. They did it later in the season. We need to see it all season. And that's the biggest piece of this. Speaking of being aggressive, the linebacker room and the linebacker play is also a part of this, because there is a way to play passive linebacker where you just sit back and you read and, that kind of a thing, and then, react and that kind of a deal. Not a terrible way to play linebacker, but not the way we want these linebackers to play. And I think that's a big piece of this as well, because in the second half of the season, they were not playing passive. They were playing aggressive, and the stats bear out that not only were they better as a defense, but they were better individually as well.
Look, I'm okay with Notre Dame being more of a read and react team and a fit team because of the personnel they have on defense. I did not love last year the fact that they asked 6'2", 275-pound Donovan Heinisch to two-gap all day against 6'6", 340-pound Anez Cooper at Miami. Wasn't the biggest fan of that. But I think the personnel, and that's not a shot at Donovan Heinisch. That's just you're asking him to do something that's not in his wheelhouse. In the same like that, you're not going to ask Eli Raridan to run whip routes all day and to catch tunnel screens and do things like that. It's just not in his wheelhouse. It's not a skill set. Asking Donovan Heinisch to two-gap all day against Miami, the biggest offensive line physically that you faced all year, is not in his wheelhouse. However, having said that, this year your defensive tackle room fits more of what you were asking Donovan Heinisch to do last year. You have significantly more Gabe Rubios in the room this year than you did last year when Gabe Rubio was a part of the room. You have Jason Onye, who's 6'5", close to 300 pounds. Elijah Hughes is 6'3", close to 300 pounds. Tion Gray is 6'5", 330 pounds. Francis Brew is your smallest guy at 6'1", 285. He's also probably your strongest guy in the room. So I'm okay with Brian John Marie and Chris Ash asking the linebackers to fit all day. But if you're going to do that, needs to be more aggressive. And that doesn't mean that you can't use them as weapons. What does that mean? Last year, unfortunately, fans are willing to build their entire, they're willing to formulate their opinions around a player based on a couple of bad performances or one bad performance. And people, when you talk about Drake Bowen, only want to talk about the touchdown that he gave up against Texas A&M and how he played against Miami. Well, here's the facts. Drake Bowen was not the only linebacker that played poorly against Miami, Texas A&M, and Purdue. He wasn't. Once the defense found its footing, because schematically it was very different from what they were being asked to do under Al Golden, we saw a significant improvement from the linebackers. Drake Bowen and Kingston were significantly more productive. Really, all of the linebackers were more productive in the latter half of the regular season than they were to start it. Drake Bowen on PFF was credited with 28 total run stops last season. 21 of them came in the final 7 games from NC State to the end of the year. He also had 17 total pressures and 8 hits plus sacks on the quarterback last year. 10 of those pressures and 5 of the hits plus sacks on the quarterback came in the final 7 games. The same could be said for Kingston. Kingston had 25 total run stops last year. 15 of them came against NC State to Syracuse, and he would have had more if he didn't get hurt in the Syracuse game. That number probably would have been bumped up to potentially 17 or 18 if he would have played against Stanford. He also had 23 pressures and 5 hits plus sacks on the quarterback last year. 13 of those pressures came from NC State to Syracuse, and 4 hits plus sacks on the quarterback came in that same time frame. So what that showed us last year is that the linebackers were more productive when they had clarity on what they were asked to do. It's something Marcus Freeman talks about all the time. Clarity equals velocity. Once they had clarity on what they were being asked to do, and Chris Ash unleashed them and really allowed them to flow to the football and play more aggressive, we got to see that. But throughout 2026, I don't want to have to keep referring back to 2025 and saying, this is how you should be playing. Look at how you played against Arkansas. Look at how you played against Boise State. Look at how you played against Stanford and Syracuse and Pitt. Because the fact of the matter is, the most passive that Chris Ash had the linebackers playing was against Miami, Texas A&M, and USC. The 3 best opponents that you played in 2025. That can't be the case this year when you play BYU, Miami, and SMU. Just can't be.
Completely agree. And I think that, a lot of that is, paralysis by analysis and things like that, being in a new defense. And I think year 2 will definitely help that as well. You know, we saw them get so much better in the second half. I think part of that is because they, changed their responsibility and they were allowed to play downhill a little bit more, but it was also them understanding what was being asked of them, within this scheme and within this defense as well. And so I think the combination of the two, and now moving into year 2, yes, they have a new linebackers coach, but I don't think the scheme is going to be a whole lot different. I don't think the responsibilities are going to be a whole lot different. It's how they're going to play it. And hopefully it's going to look a lot more like the second half of 25 than the first half of 25 for sure. But at the same time, it's like these guys have all the talent in the world. They are at their best when they're playing downhill, right? I mean, could they do the read, react, and all of that? Absolutely, yes. And they have the talent to scrape and come downhill and do all of those kinds of things. And a lot of that is reading and reacting. But triggering those guys, and not from a blitz standpoint, from triggering those guys, allowing them to play downhill, allowing them to play with their eyes in the backfield, things like that, will only prove to be a positive for this defense, in my opinion. And then, obviously, you take advantage of KVA and Snead and their ability to come off the edge and things like that. Again, not even necessarily blitzing, but just coming off the edge in a normal package, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. And here's why this is so crucial for this upcoming season. Been a lot of talk about Notre Dame's schedule and how it's soft and it's a cupcake. I find it ironic when some Miami fans say that Notre Dame has a cupcake schedule, considering that they play Miami. Again, different conversation for a different day. But why this is so important is now that guys like Drake Bowen and Kingston and Jalen Snead and Jaden Ausberry, a lot of the members of your defensive line room, Boubacar, Bryce, Jason Onye, Armel Mukum, Elijah Hughes, Cole Mullins, guys like that, are going into year 2 in the Chris Ash system. You could get a real big false sense of confidence because of the makeup of their September slate that this passive defense can work. Because let's be real about something, guys. It will work against Wisconsin. It will work against Rice. It will work against Michigan State and Purdue to varying degrees. But all of this is going to be building up to when they play BYU on the road on October 17th, when they host Miami on November 7th under the lights, and when they host SMU under the lights on Senior Day. That's not the philosophical switch can't be turned on and off depending on who you play. It can't be. It can't be like, well, we'll just kind of roll the footballs out and, we'll do what we got to do and beat Purdue, but we'll really ramp it up against BYU. You have to be consistently the same 100%. Aggressive football team that you are week over week. That was an ideology that they adopted at the tail end of last season. That's why they beat Syracuse 70-7. That's why they went into halftime against Stanford, up 35-0? That's why they absolutely shut down Pitt, a ranked team on the road. And so you have to be that consistently. It's not a switch that you can turn on and off. That's why it's imperative this upcoming season that they do it week in and week out, because they can get by with doing it. You'll hear us in the postgame show call it out if they're not. Yep. It's like, folks, we can be content with Notre Dame winning 38-10 against a bad opponent playing passive defense. But the things that they're going to do against Rice, and if it's passive, will not work the same when Miami comes to town.
Completely agree. And I think a lot of this linebacker talk, also has to do with what the defensive line is going to be doing. And, it just asked Jesse Stiers, the best friend of a middle linebacker is a stud defensive tackle, right? And which allows him to scrape and do all the things that you want to do at linebacker, not have to worry about offensive linemen in your face. And I think the defensive line, and we talked about it in show number 1, this defensive line, especially in the middle, has a ton of talent. Who's going to, end up front? What's the rotation going to be? All that kind of remains in flux. But at the same time, from a scheme standpoint, they need to be more aggressive. You can't just sit back and allow things to happen as a defensive line and then think that the linebackers are going to be able to do what you want them to do. The defensive line has to be in attack mode, Trev.
Vince, they didn't bring Charlie Partridge to South Bend to coach up a bunch of passive defensive linemen.
Right.
I mean, when you go back and look at what he's done at Pitt, Pitt in 2021 led the entire nation in tackles for a loss. I think they were third in 2020. He's had multiple first-round draft picks. He's coached guys like J.J. Watt. You don't bring a guy like that to South Bend to just kind of like, okay, well, we're just need you to kind of hold strong at the point of attack and then let the linebackers read off you. When you have Boubacar, Bryce, Keon Keeley, Rodney Dunham, Logan Thomas, Jason Onye, the list goes on and on and on across the board. You got to let some of those guys pin their ears back. You're bringing in an all ACC caliber player in Francis Brew. You are, and you're not bringing him in to just sit back and eat up space and let people fit off of you all day. Marcus Freeman talked last year ad nauseum, middle of the season, I would say, about marrying up your coverage in your front. We are two gentlemen under the belief that Notre Dame has the best secondary in the country. Yep. They cannot cover opposing wide receivers for 7 to 8 seconds. But here's why it's so important. This is kind of all-encompassing, why it's important to remain aggressive in coverage and to let your defensive line pin their ears back. There were multiple plays against Arkansas where Taylon Green completed a bunch of passes where the coverage was too soft and you were getting a pass rush. There you were. But the pass rush had no hope of getting home if you're giving a wide receiver an 8-yard cushion when you need 4 yards to move the sticks. The defensive line will not get home. I don't care who you have lined up I don't care if it's Colin Simmons. I don't care if it's Dylan Stewart. I don't care if it's John Henry Daly. I don't care if it's Boubacar Traore. They're not getting home in a half a second. You know what I'm saying, Vince?
Yep, I do.
On the inverse, we also saw him complete plays when the defensive line wasn't allowed to pin their ears back, and the coverage was just, airtight. But you can only have airtight coverage for so long. If you want more tackles for loss, if you want players like Bryce Young to finish more at the point of attack, Bryce Young finished the year second on the team in total pressures with 29, but had a fraction of Boubacar Traore's hits plus sacks on the quarterback. You got to let them pin their ears back more. If you want Bryce Young to have more than 2 tackles for loss at the end of the year, you need to let him go eat in the run game. That's my whole thing. And so that's where you got to be at, in my opinion, as a defensive line, is you have to be willing to attack more often than what you did last year.
100%. I think the name of the game is aggressive. Being aggressive, allowing your guys to go make plays. I think that's going to be, the biggest piece of this defense, and we want to see it starting, that first weekend of September up in Wisconsin. That's what we want to see, and I don't care who they're playing. You always bring the same defense, and I think consistency defensively is going to be huge this year because, again, we've talked about it ad nauseum. There's a lot riding on this season. And I think in the past, a lot of people, us included, have said, this team is a quarterback away. This team is an offense away, from really being a national championship contender. We don't think that's the case with the offense this year. The defense still needs to hold up its end of the bargain.
This can't be the outlier season. In
Right.
2024, the defense was good enough to win a championship. I would argue in 2023, the defense in certain areas was good enough to win a national championship. We saw a little sneak preview last year of what it looks like when their defense doesn't hold up their end of the bargain. The driving narrative for Notre Dame is, they're going to be able to run the football and their defense is going to be nasty. Well, part of that narrative is going to be turned on its head this year when people learn that Notre Dame does have a valid passing attack.
Mm-hmm.
I've been longing for the day when Notre Dame puts the thought in the minds of analysts of like, oh, they can throw the football.
Right.
Oh, it's not just that they're going to beat you rushing for 300 yards. They can also beat you throwing for 350 yards as well. Maybe not necessarily in the same game, although I wouldn't be too upset about it if I saw Notre Dame put out 650 total yards of offense. But point being, this can't be the year where the defense is the reason that prevents them from competing for a title. And unfortunately, last year, it was one of the reasons.
Look, I said it before, and I know it's not a popular opinion, after the whole, the Texas A&M situation and, missing the, all of the things, right? Well, then Texas A&M went the length of the field and scored. The defense, Notre Dame had the lead, even with the botched extra point and all. Notre Dame had the lead. If the defense steps up and doesn't allow Texas A&M to go down the field, they win that game. With all the warts that they had, Notre Dame still wins that game. And so again, I'm not necessarily throwing the defense under the bus, but if you want to be a championship level defense, you make that stop right there and you pick up your special teams and that didn't make the play that they needed to make. You pick them up and you still win that game.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, yes, a lot of attention goes to the botched extra point, but I'd be okay if he botched an extra point to where they have 40 points, not 41, if the defense allowed 20.
Yeah, 100%. Exactly. It didn't even have to come down to a final drive. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, yes, absolutely. It was a shootout.
It was the defense in the first two games. Notre Dame drives down against Miami in the opener. They tie it 24-24. All the defense has to do is get a stop, like they had done on every possession in between Miami's first drive of the second half and their last drive of the second half. You just had to get a stop. Get the ball back in the hands of C.J. Carr and Mike Denbrock's offense. Who knows what happens at that point? Do they go down and get a field goal? Do they? I don't know the answer to that, because we sit here and play the what if game until the cows come home, especially with Notre Dame football.
Yes, of course.
But it was the defense that came up short. Against Texas A&M, they allowed the most points allowed in Notre Dame Stadium since Brian Van Gorder was the defensive coordinator. Those are the facts.
Yeah.
That's what happened against, I think it was against Northwestern is the last time that they allowed an opponent to score over 40 points in like 2014. It was something gross. The most. I mean, you've had teams like Ohio State who had, Maserati Mitsubishi Marv come into the stadium. And,
Mitsubishi Marv.
Like you got, you've had those offenses come into the stadium that didn't even score over 20 points.
Right.
And you allowed that a quarterback in Marcel Reed completing a little bit over 50% of his passes to put up 41 points of offense. It's not like they had a kick return it's not like they had a pick six for a touchdown or a scoop and score for a touchdown. And that, I think, is the most unfortunate piece. But at the end of the day, this can't be the year where Notre Dame's defense doesn't live up to their end of the bargain. Chris Ash is going into year 2. You return your top producers at every position group. At every single one. There's no excuse this year. You know what I mean? Like, you bring back Boubacar Traore, who led the team in tackles for loss. Thank you. I can't coin that as my own. I saw it on X. I've just been
that's fantastic.
I've been itching for a reason. Like, Mitsubishi Marv sounds better than Mazda Marv, but I was thinking of like just car brands that's not a Maserati.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Thank you.
But
you return your top producer at every level. Boubacar comes back, and he led the team in pressures, tackles for loss, and sacks last year. You bring back Drake Bowen. You bring back Kingston, Jaden Ausberry, Jalen Sneed, who all combined for a boatload of tackles that I can't do the mental math right now quick enough to rattle it off. You bring back Leonard Moore, who led your team in interceptions last year. You bring back Christian Gray, who led your team in pass breakups last year. You bring back Adon Schuler, who I think leads your secondary in career starts from last year. You bring back Tay Johnson, who was second on the team in overall interceptions last year. This has to be the year where Notre Dame's defense holds up their end of the bargain, because all signs are pointing in that direction. But that's what makes this show so important, guys, is because it's very easy to sit here and just say, well, just do what you did at the end of last year and you'll be okay. Well, at this point last year, I made the mistake of saying, with the level of talent on this defense, you just can't call the incorrect things and you'll be okay. And then the first 2 games of the season happened. Really, the first 3 games of the season happened.
Yeah.
There's no world where you should be giving up 24 first half points to Purdue.
Correct.
No world where that should be happening. So that's where we're at with this defense, Vince. I mean, a lot is riding on this season, on this unit. I think the offense is going to live up to their end of the bargain. And I have all the reason to believe that the defense will, from a talent standpoint. Where it's going to be separated is what's on the sideline for Notre Dame. I'm a firm believer in that.
Completely agree. This is going to be a big year for the defense. It's going to be a big year for the offense as well. It's a big year for Notre Dame. And, we think the defense will hold up their end of the bargain, but there's a bunch of excitement going into this fall and what could be. And I think some of these changes, adjustments, continuations, however you want to look at it, I think this is going to be a defense to contend with, and I'm really looking forward to it. As long as some of these things are taken into account, and I think that they will be. I think this is going to be a defense that's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and the offense will feed off the defense. The defense is going to put the offense in some good positions, and vice versa. So a lot of things to look forward to, especially on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, without a doubt. They're the favorites on FanDuel to win the national title. One of the favorites on FanDuel to win the national title. It can't just all be on the shoulders of CJ Carr. He's going to need some help out from his defense as well. I'm with you completely.
Yep. All right, Trev. Well, to take us home, let's do a little bit of mailbag time, a little daily mailbag. Again, if you want to get a question in there, make sure you put the MB in front of your question or the little mailbox emoji so we can see that you want to ask a question. And, and obviously when we do these daily mailbags, we want to keep it as close as we can to the topics that we discussed today, which position battles on the defense and schematic changes on the defense, things of that nature. We could drift into some other things, but you never know. So get your questions in here. We'll do the best that we can here to polish up the rest of this show. So what do we got, Trev?
Forgot that's my job in today's show.
It is your job today, buddy. You're in charge of what comes up.
All righty. Well, our guy Salty is going to get us kicked off here, Vince.
All right. From Salty, some say that the new 5-for-5 eligibility rules will not be important to elite schools like Notre Dame, where the best players enter the NFL draft after 3 years. Do you agree?
To varying degrees, sure. Like there's going to be players that come along all the time that just, especially schools like Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Bama, Georgia, Miami, like you name it. I mean, Malachi Toney is not jumping for joy because a 5-for-5 rule was passed. Let's just say that. Jeremiah Love in no way would be impacted by the 5-for-5. Leonard Moore is not going to be impacted by the 5-for-5 rule. However, where I will say that you're going to see an impact is for players like on Notre Dame's current roster, Elijah Hughes, maybe Luke Talich.
That was mine. Yep.
Players like that where it's like, hey, maybe if Notre Dame has a season that we believe them to have or believe that they're going to have, there's a world where 5 members of their secondary are gone. Gone. Leonard Moore is, look, not that I'm predicting. You know what? I'm not even going to speak that out there. I'm just going to say simply Leonard Moore is going to be gone after this season. Most likely Christian Gray is gone after this season because I don't think that there's anything more for him to prove at the collegiate level. DJ McKinney has to leave because he's out of eligibility. Could Adon come back? Sure. But if Notre Dame plays 14, 15, 16 games, he's a returning captain. He just wrapped up his 3rd year in the starting lineup. I don't think there's anything that he's going to be able to prove in 27 that he hasn't already shown from 24 through 26. And if Tay Johnson is the player we believe him to be, he's probably also going to bounce for the NFL draft too. Does Luke Talich exercise the 5-for-5 and come back and be in the starting lineup and potentially have the tallest safety tandem in Notre Dame history with 6'4" Luke Talich and 6'5" Joey O'Brien? Maybe. So there will be some impact, but I do agree with you, Salty. It's not as imperative as what some may think at Notre Dame or other top-level schools, but it will still be a factor nonetheless.
Yeah, it's going to be a factor from a depth standpoint. It's also going to be a factor on special teams. And I know a lot of people don't think about special teams, and I get it, but you're allowed to now take your elite freshmen who, because your roster is so deep, they're probably not going to play on offense and defense, but now they can play the entire season on special teams. That makes a difference. And Marty Biaggi is the biggest proponent of the 5-for-5 of anybody, over in the Goog before they switch over to the Shields building. But he's got his pick of the litter now, and he doesn't have to do any higher math. Okay, well, we can use this guy for this 4 games. We can use this guy for this 4 games. And we can use these guys for these 4 games, maybe 2 here, maybe 2 over here, or maybe 1 here. He doesn't have to do that anymore. It's everybody is available for special teams. That's where it's going to matter. And it's also going to matter from a transfer standpoint, in my opinion, because let's pick Joey O'Brien just for fun. Let's say he doesn't get the 4th safety spot. Okay. Normally he'd have 4 games to play with, and he would have those 4 games on special teams. And then he'd have, 8 to 12 games to sit around and do nothing except practice. Well, now he's engaged because he's going to play every single game on special teams, probably a special team starter across the board. And he's not going to be sitting around thinking, well, what if I transfer someplace else because I'm not playing? I think that matters. And I think that matters for these younger guys that are high quality recruits that in other years they would redshirt. They're sitting around all year. And look, man, I don't mind when the transfer portal's out there and there's a bunch of money out there. They're going to be tempted to get out of here, or any other school, not necessarily Notre Dame, but just in general, the elite schools, as Salty is referring to. So I think it's going to keep guys engaged, which I think is important.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I think where you're going to see the impact at elite level programs like Notre Dame, Oregon, all the ones that I listed off before, it's going to be more of an impact on the front end than it is on the back end.
Right.
Like I see a world where, like, if the 5-for-5 rule was passed prior to the 2025 season, James Flanagan is not waiting until the 8th game of the year to play.
Correct.
Where I think of this year, like there's a player like Ebenezer Utade. In previous seasons, I think Notre Dame would have waited to play him until, maybe he finds a role on special teams, but if not, maybe they wait to redshirt him. I don't really love that idea because with a player like that, I don't see him being a 5-year player anyways, especially once he finds his footing. But, this year I think you're going to see Ebenezer play in 6 games in the waning moments of games. Maybe now they have enough sample size through their starting game against Wisconsin to after they get done playing Stanford that maybe they're willing to take him with them out to Provo. Who knows? But Salta, so I apologize. I'm actually changing my answer. I do think it's going to be important at elite schools, but it's going to be more so for the front end impact, more so than the back end impact. That's how I view that one.
Yep, I agree.
From Aiden Banami.
If there are injuries, can Golden play corner? Can Zachary play nickel effectively?
I guess I'll work front to back on this one. Can Dallas Golden play corner? Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, this spring he started to take reps at field corner, and really, as the spring started to progress, he started to take more reps at field corner than what he did at nickel, and I thought he looked very comfortable out there in space. When they brought in DJ McKinney and Jaden Sanders, like I said before, like Vince talked about earlier in the show, nothing was promised to them. They were not given a starting spot. It was never a, hey, if you come to Notre Dame, you can start. So you should come to South Bend. I think Dallas Golden took that as a personal challenge of like, oh, okay, you wanted to bring somebody in from the transfer portal. All right, bet, let's run it. And I'm saying that in a good way, not like he's like, oh, the coaching staff is stupid. They got me. Nothing like that at all. He's a competitor. I mean, we're talking about a guy who committed to Notre Dame at the year after Leonard Moore had his brilliant true freshman season. Kid's not afraid of competition. As far as Mark Zachary playing nickel effectively, do I think he could from a coverage standpoint? I do. He had some things to work on. He was kind of raw coming in, but he was a more natural cornerback in coverage, in my opinion, than what Dallas Golden was. Dallas Golden was just a freak athlete, that played multiple positions, whereas Mark Zachary played corner. Dallas Golden was a running back. He was a kickoff returner. He was a corner. He was a nickel. He played a little safety coming out of high school, whereas Mark Zachary was a corner. And so I think in coverage he would be okay. Where I get a little concerned is his support in the run game at nickel. Things happen a little bit quicker around the line of scrimmage when you're at that position. Now, I'm a little worried about his size. Having said that, Jordan Clark was a very good nickel for Notre Dame, and he was 5'10", 182 pounds on the roster in 2024. Now, he was also like a 5th-year, 6-year senior. So you have a little bit of extra that like grown man strength a little bit that Jordan Clark was playing with. But yeah, I think he absolutely could, but he would need a little bit of development. If I was given a choice between the two, I would be more confident in Dallas Golden playing field corner than I would Mark Zachary playing nickel. That's where I'm at.
Love it. From a guy named Brian Driscoll. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it.
I think it's Driscoll.
Is it Driscoll? Okay. Yeah. I've never seen Brian with a Y before, but that's okay. From Brian Driscoll. Trevor, how are you able to still work with Vince and respect his opinions knowing he doesn't like Rocky? I may have ticked off the boss.
Well, as a wise man once said, it doesn't matter how hard you hit. All that matters is how hard you get hit and can keep moving forward. Vince, I'm not expecting you to understand what that means, considering you don't like the movies that those are from. But that is how, Mr. Driscoll, that is how I'm still able to work with Vince and respect his opinions, knowing he doesn't like Rocky. I believe it was another wise man that also told me that there is no such thing as a wrong opinion. There's just opinions that you can agree with or disagree with. However, my only pushback to that would be I would strongly consider this being a wrong opinion, but it is what it is.
That's fair. That's fair. It's if anybody ever watches the evening show with Sean and myself, this is a widely talked about issue with my character, that I am not a Rocky fan. But I mean, it is what it is, and frankly, I personally believed is a strength of character to stick to your guns and not just go with the masses on certain things. And for me, it's Rocky. And just to make sure I alienate everybody on the planet, the other movie that I really dislike and I don't dislike Rocky, it's just not for me. The movie I absolutely dislike is A Christmas Story. And that rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
Well, we'll be doing the mailbag for the rest of the day without Vince. But thankfully for him, you were not alone. Our guy, Tommy Gunn's in the chat. He said he's with you on Rocky and boxing movies in general.
Thank you, Tommy. I appreciate you very much. Appreciate you.
Yeah, it is what it is. Not A Christmas Story, bro.
I can't stand that movie.
Oh my goodness, I'm getting you a leg lamp for Christmas, dude.
The funny part is the bowl game that my son played in at the Division II level this past year, the trophy was the leg lamp. Because
that's awesome.
Because they played it in Hobart, which is where that movie is from. So
that's fantastic.
That was the trophy, and unfortunately they lost it, so I didn't have to take a picture with it or my son. But yes.
What was the name of the bowl?
It was it was named after a candy company that's out there in Hobart. Albanese Candy Company Bowl.
Dude, Albanese gummy bears and gummy worms are awesome.
Yes.
They're so good.
And they all got some of that, which was kind of like the part of their like bowl, gifts or whatever. So, yes.
Fair enough. I will keep my eye out on FanDuel for if they have any odds for the Albanese Candy Gummy Worms / Gummy Bear Bowl next year. I'll keep my eye out for it.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, Armored Dude, USMA 87. How much adjustment do you think the DBs will have to make with Coach Henry? How much day-to-day input will Coach Ash and Freeman have?
Not a ton. Like, there's always an adjustment period when you go from somebody who recruited you out of high school, developed you for your first several years of college, and then, as a veteran room, you have a new guy step in. One of the things that I appreciate that Coach Henry did is one of his first days on the job, he called Mike Mickens. And it wasn't like, hey, who are your dudes? It doesn't take Inspector Gadget to figure out who the dudes are in Notre Dame secondary, right? But what he did is, how do they learn? How do these players learn at an elite level? And that is something that we all greatly appreciated at the time. And Brian talked about it a lot when Aaron Henry was first hired. So how much adjustment do I think the defensive backs will have to make with Coach Henry? At this point, I would say they're pretty grounded with him, especially after watching him through spring. He was very intentional, very hands-on in a lot of the work that they were doing. But, it's not just him. I think Andy Buzz is a factor in that room. Javon Codlin is also a factor in that room. So there is some continuity with them and some familiar faces, especially with Javon Codlin. But how much day-to-day input will the other coaches have? I mean, it's still Chris Ash's defense, and it's still Marcus Freeman's team, and everything kind of trickles down from the top. But Aaron Henry stepping in as the pass game coordinator and the co-defensive coordinator. So, I mean, how much input? They're all going to have to be lockstep with how they want things to look. But I don't think anything's going to look dramatically different, if that's what you're asking here, USMA. That's where I'm at with this one.
Completely agree. And the day-to-day influence of the defensive coordinator and the head coach on a position group are going to be minimal at best, no matter who the position coach is. They're just not going to step on the toes of the position coach. And so from a day-to-day, look, the guys are going to have to learn probably some new drills, because different coaches like to do different drills on a daily basis, that kind of stuff. But I think big picture wise, there's not going to be that much adjustment at all. From Salty, how should Notre Dame manage playing time in the secondary where the depth chart features players that would start for many other schools?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the double-edged sword of when we talk about, they have amazing depth and, their skilled talent in the depth is next to none. And it's all great. You also have to find a way to feed a bunch of mouths on the same defense. That is a challenge. I would rather that be the problem than not. But having said that, Salty, the answer is actually pretty simple. It's who earns it. Who earns the playing time? Who forces the issue to be on the field? Because we could talk about talent, 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 talent. How many talented players have we seen come through Notre Dame that don't earn the playing time? I like that's really at the end of the day what I would be paying attention to if I was a coach. To this day, we still hear people talk about how Cam Williams is the most gifted wide receiver on the roster. And that was with the additions of Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham and Caden Finley. That's with Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison coming back. The conversation always circles back around to Cam Williams, but he has to be the one to force the issue to get more playing time. And that's how I view the secondary. It's you have a lot of talented people at your disposal, a lot of talented players at your disposal, but Aaron Henry, Chris Ash, Marcus Freeman, Brian John Marie, and Charlie Partridge aren't just going to play you if you're just talented. That's the biggest key. And they have to force the issue. They have to develop and grow within the defense and elevate their game and understanding and playing at the collegiate level. So that's how I view it shaking out, Salty.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's going to be a fine line between getting some guys ready for next year, obviously, but you can't do that to the detriment of what's going on this year. And I think that's an important thing to understand. But to your point, if guys are forcing the issue and they're like knocking on the door to play, then you play them. You play them, you get them in situations that are important, not just mop up time. I think that's an important piece of this as well. But then you're also not afraid to take out your starters to preserve them for the rest of the year, potentially at halftime, if the case may, lends it to that situation. And so, it just all depends on what these guys are bringing to the table and how much they're pushing for playing time. Agreed. Is McKinney likely to start at corner opposite Leonard Moore?
I mean, as of today, yes. But like we talked about, that's one of the position battles that we're really much looking forward to. I mean, is McKinney going to probably trot out with the first team day one? Potentially. But again, the next time we see DJ McKinney in a gold helmet and a navy blue uniform will be the first time we see DJ McKinney in a gold helmet that I guess doesn't have a Colorado Buffaloes logo on it and a blue uniform. So I say all of that to say, is he likely going to start? Yes, that's one of the reasons why they brought him in. But if a cornerback like Dallas Golden forces the issue, then I think we have something to talk about. But it's right. As of today, that's where I'll be with that.
That's the penciled in starting duo for sure. Tommy Guns, who will be the team leader in the major defensive categories? Tackles for loss, sacks, interceptions, pass breakups, etc. at each level for all of the categories. Good grief. That's a loaded question. We can kind of fire through, I guess, some of these answers, but I don't know if we're going to go each level, Tommy. That's asking an awful lot.
Yeah. This one's tough. I'll just go overall team leaders.
I agree.
And then we'll knock out and then maybe mention some honorable mentions to round this out. So tackles, I think the leader's Drake Bowen.
Correct.
Cool.
Completely
Sounds good.
Agree.
Tackles for loss, Vince. Who do you got?
This is an interesting one. I think you could go a couple of different directions. You could go, Jalen Sneed. You could go Boubacar. You could go Bryce. I think there's a couple of different options there. I don't know. Like Jalen Sneed's going to, if you were going by percentage of snaps, maybe, he's up there, percentage of snaps where he, rushes the passer and things like that. But I don't think he's going to get enough opportunities. So I'll go Boubacar for fun.
I am also, especially considering that sacks also count for tackles for a loss. I'm also going to go Boubacar, which I'm assuming we're both under the assumption that Boubacar will also be the team leader in sacks as well.
Yep.
What about interceptions?
I'm going to go Tay Johnson. I think he's just going to play that center field like Pete Crow Armstrong out there and just be picking guys off all over the place. He just has such a nose for the football. I feel like he's going to get his hands on the ball an awful lot. And I think a close second could potentially be McKinney, because I think he's going to get picked on a lot.
Agreed. I'm with you. Pass breakups. What do you think?
This is a good one. This year you mentioned it. Christian Gray led the team in pass breakups because he got picked on a lot, right? If he starts at corner, I could still see him being picked on a lot, maybe to the detriment of some offensive coordinators. So I'm going to, since the chat just does not like to throw any love whatsoever to Christian Gray, I'm going to throw it to him here. I'm going to say he once again leads the team in pass breakups.
I like that a lot. I mean, I think he did last year, so I have all the reason to believe that. I think he'll have some opportunities in the nickel. If it's not going to be him, I do think it will also be DJ McKinney.
Yeah.
I just, until proven differently, I can't imagine a world where opposing offenses go into games where they're willing to throw in Leonard Moore's direction.
Yeah. Yep.
I just can't picture that happening again. I just can't.
They won't do it enough for him to lead any categories. You know what I mean? Like, he'll get some picks, he'll get pass breakups, all of the things, but I just don't think it'll be enough for him to lead the team.
As far as honorable mentions go, Tommy, I see that you were displeased in the chat that we are not doing this entire question, so I apologize. But I will do my best to rattle this off here for you. Tackles at every position group. I think Bryce Young is going to lead in tackles on the D-line. I think it's going to be Drake Bowen in the linebacking core and Adon Schuler at the safety position. Tackles for losses and sacks, we both said it's Boubacar. I think in both of those categories at linebacker, it's going to be Kingston Viliamaasa. And then as far as interceptions at every level, I don't see a single defensive end or defensive lineman getting an interception.
Those are such luck. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
However, having said that, I'm just going to speak this into existence because I think it would be dope. Give me a Jared Dawson interception.
Oh, man.
On a tip pass, and I want to see somebody try to tackle that dude. That's where I'm at with that one. So that's my answer for interceptions on the D-line. Linebacking core, I'm going to go Drake Bowen. I think he takes a step this year in pass coverage. He really started to ramp it up last year. Interceptions, we already talked about in the secondary. Pass breakups, I'll go Bryce Young on the D-line for tip passes. I don't know if those are credited as pass breakups or passes defended.
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But I'll go Bryce Young for tip passes. In the linebacking core, I'll actually go Kingston. I think he'll get his hands on more than Drake, but I think Drake is going to get more interceptions. We already answered it in the secondary. So, Tommy, I hope that did service to your question, just because you asked so nicely.
Love that so much.
However, sticking on the theme of the Christian Gray talk,
what will Christian Gray's role be? Is he the third, the fourth, or the fifth in the depth chart at corner? Well, I don't know that he's going to be in the depth chart at corner at all. So I think he's going to be the nickel, and I think he will be the number one nickel.
I also think I misspoke on the last one. If I said Jared Dawson, my apologies. I meant Francis Brew. I was just thinking.
You said Dawson for sure, yeah.
Okay. Well, then Francis Brew, my apologies. Thank you for catching that sign. I appreciate that. All righty. Now, look, as far as Christian Gray is concerned, I mean, the depth at corner, if he's the starting nickel, I could also see him being the reliever at field. Like, God forbid anything happens to DJ McKinney.
Sure.
So that would put him second on the.
Such a typical thing that Notre Dame would do. They would move somebody over there with the experience of playing field corner on a regular basis. He would move there, and probably Dallas Golden moves in at nickel. That would 100% be what they would do.
Yeah, I mean, Dallas Golden, especially if he continues to elevate, you never know what you'll get from Jaden Sanders either. But look, we got to stop with this. Will he be fourth or fifth on the depth chart? Christian Gray has things that he has to improve on. One of them is his health. I don't think he has as bad of a performance against Texas A&M this past season if his shoulder wasn't at 50%. We can't only highlight the bad plays that Christian Gray has. But we can't talk about that without also mentioning the 98-yard pick six he had against USC, or the interception he had against USC this past season, or the interception that he had against Drew Aller in the Orange Bowl that set Notre Dame up in prime field goal range.
Yeah.
We can't ignore all of those plays either. Now, we have to be able to have a reasonable conversation with Christian Gray. He has things that he has to work on, and we also have to be willing to admit that if he works on those, he's also going to be one of the best corners in college football. When I mean one of the best, I don't mean he's going to play second to Leonard Moore's first. But we also can't talk about him like he could be fifth on a depth chart. We got to get out of that headspace.
Love it. Daily comments. What do you think of the ACC's new tiebreakers? Confusing as can be to no one's surprise. Are you familiar with the new tiebreakers? Because they used to be as confusing as all get out. I can't believe that they would get more confusing.
I'm not sure. I'm going to do some quick research on it real quick because I want to try to answer this because I did see that they were coming out with new tie-breaking rules. Okay, so real quick search here. They prioritize head-to-head results, shocking that comes out of the ACC, and an overall body of work over the previous opponent win percentage method. So the tie teams are separated by their head-to-head results, so assuming that they played each other, that makes sense. And it's also factored in with the team success ranking. So if teams remain tied and head-to-head competition cannot separate them, so like if they just didn't play each other, the tie is broken using the Sports Source Analytics team success ranking, a metric also utilized by the CFP committee. And then the third, if the team success ranking doesn't break the tie, it's a blind draw administered by the commissioner breaks any remaining ties.
Did you say the commissioner breaks ties?
According to Fox Carolina News,
Wow.
A blind draw administered by the commissioner breaks any remaining ties.
A blind draw. That's the blind leading the blind there.
I guess so. That is one that is very interesting. Very interesting. But what do I think of them? They're still going to be convoluted. I think it should just be the highest ranked two ACC teams play for the ACC conference title. If you want to factor in head-to-head, I think that'd be a useful metric as well. But they're always going to be confusing, in my opinion.
Yep.
All righty.
I
got
ICU. Okay,
yep.
I remember ICU. My bad. It's I don't like the fact that they just have like ICU with Irish luck. I remember you. Okay, if they hit their ceiling, rate these defensive tackles. Elijah Golden. You're gonna have to help me out with some of these names.
Yep, I got you. Yep. Elijah Golden, David Foloruncu, Segun Alexander, Christopher Burgess, Armel Mukum. Oh boy. This is definitely ICURN. This is definitely a better question for Brian. I will not lie to you there. So I'm going to give it my best go. I kind of separate them into different tiers, and they're all very, very high. But as of right now, I would probably put David Foloruncu and Elijah Golden up at the top. Then in kind of like the next level, you could argue that it's all three of Armel Mukum, Christopher Burgess, and Segun Alexander. One of the difficult pieces to this question is they're going to be utilized differently. Yes, all 5 of these guys play defensive tackle, but I think they're going to be utilized differently. I think a player like Segun Alexander is going to be used as more of a bigger body defensive tackle, whereas I could very much see Armel Mukum being used as a penetrator and somebody used to get after the quarterback. Christopher Burgess is coming into his own. So that's my rough stab at this. I would definitely bring this back up in the Friday free-for-all mailbag and have Brian answer this question. He'd be able to do it more justice. So I apologize that I'm not able to get it there, but that's my best go at it. Vince, any thoughts?
No, I purposely left this one for you while I turned on the World Cup game for my son. So that was a fantastic analysis, sir.
You know what? That's what I do.
That's what I do. I love that.
Thanks.
That's fantastic. All right, from Salty. Should Notre Dame put Leonard Moore on Miami's top receiver no matter where he lines up, as with Mekhi Lemon against USC?
Yeah, we've gotten this question quite a bit, Salty, and my answer is maybe. That's the thing. I think a lot of people deem the top receiver from Miami to be Malachi Toney. I think Daily Comments and Spencer, if you guys are in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong. Sounds like Cooper Barkati is also having one heck of an offseason as well. I'm not willing to count out Joshua Moore or Vandrevius Jacobs or any of those players. So should they? Maybe. Marcus Freeman, I think, said it best, and it's something that I've been stealing ever since, is, you don't necessarily want to rob Peter to pay Paul type of deal. I was okay with them doing it against USC because I think there was a disparaging talent gap between Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane. Yeah. And then, I was very confident in Dallas Golden's ability against a fellow true freshman in Tanook Hines to be able to play well against him in coverage. So should they? Maybe. It depends. But how do you stop Cooper Barkati if you match up Leonard Moore on Malachi Toney? What if Joshua Moore, big body boundary receiver, is really eating you up? Do you risk putting DJ McKinney on him or Leonard Moore, who's 6'2", almost 200 pounds? So I think it'll depend on what Miami season starts to look like. But this goes back to something that I mentioned in a previous segment of today's show of be willing to make personnel changes. If you come in with a game plan and the performance at nickel has been steady and really good through over the course of the regular season, but Christian Gray or Dallas Golden or whoever is just really struggling with Malachi Toney, be willing to make the adjustment and don't wait until the final drive of the game to finally put Leonard Moore on Malachi Toney. Do it early. Do it after halftime. Do it after the first quarter, what have you. So my answer to this, Salty, is maybe. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. And that's how I view this one.
Well, I think you can even dive deeper into it. It's like sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Like make Miami think about it. Make Miami adjust, throughout the game. I think that is a good idea as well. But again, luckily, Miami's not the first game of the season this year. So you're going to have a bunch of film to watch of Miami's offense to see who's dangerous and how dangerous they are and what the offense looks like with a different quarterback and, all of these different things. And so, ask this question again in the week leading up to the Miami game, and we may have a different answer, or we may have a more definitive answer at that point, depending on how the rest of the offense looks, throughout the first 5 or 6 games or whatever it is before they play Notre Dame. I hesitate because of the transfer portal and everything that, Miami did in the offseason and things like that I want to hedge my bets a little bit on this question in July. Talk to me again in October.
No, I think that's very fair. And the other thing, too, is Notre Dame can't put all of their emphasis into stopping Malachi Toney.
100%.
That's the thing. Miami is the most talented roster that Notre Dame faces in the regular season, and I would argue it's not overly close when you look at their roster from top to bottom. The prime example that I use is Ohio State and Texas when they played in the Cotton Bowl in the playoffs 2 years ago. Every emphasis went into stopping Jeremiah Smith, and they effectively shut him down. He had 1 catch for 3 yards.
Right.
The other thing they didn't account for is Carnell Tate going for 7 for 87. Travian Henderson 1 for 75. Emeka Egbuka 5 for 51. G. Scott 5 for 30. Quinshon Judkins 3 for 22 out of the backfield. So you can't just stop Malachi Toney. I will not feel good about Notre Dame locking down Malachi Toney if Cooper Barcotti has a 7 catch for 87 yards and a touchdown type of game.
Right.
I will not hang my hat on, but at least Malachi Toney didn't beat Notre Dame. No,
doesn't
you
matter.
have to be able to game plan for the entire team. And I think that has to be top of mind.
Agreed. From Jay Melvin, Trev, if you had to give a specific statistic prediction, what stats do you think Boubacar Traore will have in the upcoming season?
Oh, gosh. If I had to guess off the top of my head, I would probably put him over the course of a 15 to 16 game season. I would probably say somewhere over 45 pressures. I know that sounds like a lot, but I mean, Colin Simmons last year in 13 games had 59 pressures and 24 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. Boubacar Traore in 11 games last year had 31. So I'm very comfortable in saying over 45 total pressures, probably somewhere over 20 combined hits plus sacks on the quarterback. Tackles for loss, I think he has a very good shot at leading the team in tackles for loss this season. I see him getting to double digits, so I would say at least 10.5, 11 tackles for a loss. That's the upcoming stat projection that I would have for Boubacar. Outside of specifics, I would need a little bit more time to think about that one, Jay Melvin. But to give you ballpark numbers, I would say anything above 45 pressures, over 20 combined hits plus sacks on the quarterback, stuff like that.
I like it. I've been in the neighborhood as you as well. From Tommy, has there ever been a 3-time team captain? Adon could want to claim that title as the first 3-time Notre Dame captain. I saw this question come in, and I did a little research. There has been one 3-time Notre Dame captain. His name is Jack Mullen, and he was captain in 1897, 1898, and 1899. So he's the one and only 3-time captain ever in the history of Notre Dame. There is obviously a handful of other 2-time captains. I mean, we're talking like 20 plus guys that have been 2-time captains, but only one 3-time captain, and it happened in the 1800s.
Love it. Love it. I mean, I love where your head's at here, Tommy. I don't know if the driving factor of a Don Shula returning to South Bend is to be a 3-time captain, or at least the first in over 100 years. Maybe I could be wrong.
Years. Yeah.
Right? Like, I could be wrong, but I don't think that's going to be the driving factor that brings him back home to South Bend. But
yeah,
I'll say this. If he does return to South Bend in 2027, he will be the first 3-time captain in the last 125 years.
Right. Agreed. That's hilarious. All right. The funny part is, when I first looked that up, I thought it said 1987.
I did too.
But it was 1887. So anyway. All right. From Spencer, closest college comp for CJ Carr in terms of play style, traits, and projected 26 production.
Oh, gosh.
College comp. Ooh, baby.
Okay. I mean, as far as like play style and traits, I think he has a lot of similarities to Joe Burrow. And every time Brian or I say that, people are like, oh, so he's going to throw for 60 touchdowns. That is not what we are saying. But they have very similar play styles. They have capabilities as a runner. I would give the edge to Joe Burrow in that sense. But I think from a processing standpoint, I think from an arm strength and arm talent standpoint, they're very similar in that light. Burrow has a little bit of a bigger frame. I think he's like 6'4", 220-something odd pounds. I think CJ Carr is, depending on whoever's doing the measuring on Notre Dame's roster, floats anywhere back and forth from 6'2" to 6'3". But as far as play style and traits, like that clutch factor, like Joe Burrow played with that level of swagger of like, hey man, like we're just going to go out and win this thing because the ball is in my hands. I think CJ has a lot of that. I do. But as far as like specific football play style, I think they process very similarly. I think they have very high ceilings. He has a very similar ceiling to Joe Burrow in that regard, not necessarily that he's going to go out and win the Heisman and pass for 5,800 yards and throw for 60 touchdowns. As far as projected production this upcoming season, I kind of looked at what Julian Sayin did last year at Ohio State. You know, in 14 games, Julian Sayin passed for 3,600 yards, 32 touchdowns. He completed 77% of his passes. He averaged 9.2 yards per attempt. So I see some similarities there. I think CJ is going to be somewhere in that 3,500 to 4,000 range by the time the season is over. I think he passes for over 30 touchdowns, but while taking care of the football, I'll say this, I'm not going to be upset if CJ has like 9 or 10 interceptions. That's just the nature of how he plays. He's more of a gunslinger. I don't know if he's going to end 11 points higher in completion percentage the way that Julian Sayin did, but I think CJ will be above his 66.6% that he was last year. That's probably the best comp that I can give him right now. Vince, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I always hesitate to use Joe Burrow as a comp for anything because people then lose their minds because of the season that he had. And I get it. You instantly think Joe Burrow, you think 60 touchdowns. Like, I understand that, but you have to look at the bigger picture and what he brings to the table from just an athletic standpoint. That offense was, otherworldly. And they did some amazing things offensively and probably stuff that we won't see again for a very long time. And so I think those are good comps. I think he's more of a, from a stat standpoint, I could see the Julian Sayin comp. I think that CJ has better skills than Julian Sayin from a arm strength situation. And I also think from a processing situation. But if he puts up those kinds of numbers, then Notre Dame's going to have a really, really good season. So I'd be okay with that too.
Predicting stats is just so difficult. I mean, at this time last year, Vince, we were like, dude, if Malachi Fields doesn't have close to 1,000 yards, then what are we doing? If Jaden Greathouse doesn't lead the team in touchdowns, what are we doing here?
Right.
And now, looking back, Jaden Greathouse had 4 receptions in 2025, and Malachi Fields did not lead the team in receptions or yards or touchdowns. So it's just it's difficult.
Yep, agreed.
All righty. Let me get down here to some of the people we haven't gotten to yet. We got, boom,
Ghost of ND, how confident are you that Ash will implement the necessary defensive changes talked about?
I'm pretty confident. I mean, if I were to put it on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm somewhere around like a 6 or 7 out of 10. Like that's kind of where yeah. The
I have
second that I
teenagers.
said it, I
Sorry.
know.
My bad.
I know. I understand. I'm somewhere in that range for my confidence. Here's why. He's going into year 2 and he has a better understanding of the system. He has a better understanding of his players within
Yep.
that system.
Yep.
And he now has a real life sample size of what it looks like when you run the necessary schematic changes that they went from, at the start of the season to the end of the season. That's where I'm at with this.
Yep. My initial thought was a 7. I didn't want to be too aggressive and be like, that's a 9. He's gonna do all of it. Look, I'm not there yet. But everything we talked about, we saw physical evidence of it last year at some point or another. We just need to see it more. That's really the biggest thing, and that's the overarching comment, I think, for the entire second segment that we did today. It's like, we've seen this. We have all seen it. This is not some mythic exercise that we're doing on paper or in our minds. We've seen it all happen at one point or another last year under this defensive coordinator. Just need to see it more often. That's all. That's all there is to it. And I do agree, with a year under his belt, knowing his roster, seeing it, having empirical evidence of it, we're going to see it. But I'm going to stick at a 7. Joseph Parr, since the young guys can play all season on special teams, do you think Freeman will change his philosophy of all the starters having to play on at least one special team? Well, that is a philosophy. Obviously, it's not fully carried out because not every starter plays on at least one special team. Maybe some of the skill guys that qualifies for, but obviously the linemen aren't doing that. CJ Carr's not doing that. For most of the year, Jeremiah Love wasn't doing that last year. You know what I mean? So, like, it's a nice philosophy to have, and I get it. But he will adjust based on the scenario, and the scenario now is your stud young guys can all play. And so while you want your best players out there, you can accomplish that with some of these younger guys. And so I think he will shift, his philosophy.
Hear, hear.
Sean Stewart, what D-line position battles are you going to be watching specifically in camp? Of course, we went over all of those in segment number 1 today. There's a bunch out there. But Trev, what are you going to be kind of paying attention to as we're out there?
One that we didn't talk about is the depth at defensive end. We talked about that a lot throughout the offseason so far, but I'm very much looking forward to seeing who emerges behind Boubacar and Bryce. A lot of signs point to Keon Keeley. Rodney Dunham is having a heck of an offseason. His first year on campus. What do they get from Logan Thomas, who's going into his 3rd year with the program? Does Ebenezer Utade make another jump from, summer workouts to fall camp? So that's one of them. And then outside of that, just how does the snap distribution at defensive tackle go? Those are going to be the 2 things, Sean, that I'm watching mostly.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think very curious to see what Rodney Dunham does. He capitalizes on his spring performance and what he was able to do in the spring game, and everybody's all excited about him as a freshman, rightfully so. Is he able to crack the 2 deep? I think we talked a lot about the defensive tackle situation in the show, and I agree with all of that. I think there's so much talent there that how does it shake up and who's paired with who? I think pairings are going to be more my inclination as far as, like, are they going to pair up defensive tackles and defensive ends? Are they going to pair up just the tackles themselves and then the ends themselves? Like, what does that look like? Because we've seen it go both ways. So I think that's what I'm going to be paying the most attention to as we move through fall. Steel City Coach, entering my 50th year as an Irish fan. Congratulations, sir. Appreciate that very much. And it's scary how close I am to that number as well. Am I wrong for still being skeptical of Coach Ash based on the A&M game? My friend, it's not just the A&M game, so you are not wrong to be skeptical.
Yeah. Are you wrong for it? No. I mean, you're talking to Mr. I got to see it.
Yeah.
Like that's my whole thing. Now, are there signs pointing in the direction of a turnaround? Absolutely. But again, I said at this time last year that I don't see Notre Dame's defense taking a dramatic step back unless he actively calls the wrong things.
Like almost from a sabotaging standpoint.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
even a blind dog finds his tail every now and again. And I feel like you could call a lot of things that would still be successful.
Yes, 100%. So, no, you're not skeptical. I think, unfortunately, what you saw was a defensive coordinator that had too much of a complex scheme introduced on the first quarter of a regular season. Players had a little bit more trouble adjusting, and then some things that were implemented just flat out weren't called early on in the regular season. So the reason why the defensive performances were so bad in the first 2 to 3 games, but they lost the first two by a combined 4 points and still won the second game by like 36 points or 26 points is because they're just that talented. So no, you're not wrong for being skeptical. I think that's a good word. Is there some people that are already willing to write off the entire thing? I'm not there yet, but this is going to be a huge season for him nonetheless.
Yep. Agreed. From Salty, after Miami, which opponent this season is likely to have the most challenging defensive line?
This might surprise some people, but North Carolina.
Really?
Yes. So they returned 2 key players that I'm very interested to see how Notre Dame performs against them. Like there's this thought that Notre Dame isn't going to be tested at all in the trenches until they play Miami. I get that from a namesake, but they returned 2 players that I'm very much interested in. The first one is Makart Abu-Jade. He had like 49 pressures last year coming up from Delaware, and he was at North Carolina in 2025. He comes back this year. Then they also have a big, sawed-off, stocky defensive tackle, Isaiah Johnson, who I think both of those players were on each of mine and Brian's all-opponent teams at Irish Breakdown. So I would put them in that conversation. BYU is always going to be like the gritty, hard-nosed, try-hard defensive line, but they don't have the top-level talent of like a Makart Abu-Jade type of guy. Stanford has Tavares Tafidi coming back, so there's some likely candidates in there.
I like it. Another one from Salty is wide receiver Craver likely to even have half of the success he had against Notre Dame last season.
I better not. He
Hope
had
not.
207 receiving yards last year. So
if he has 103.5, that's still a major problem, by the way.
Yep, 100%. The only way that I'm willing to be okay with Mario Craver having 103 receiving yards is if Texas A&M has 250 total yards of offense.
Yeah.
Like in that world, I mean, mind you, Mario Craver's not going against Notre Dame this year in the regular season.
True.
So this matchup would have to be in the playoffs. But point being, if they did match up, he better have a fourth of what he did against Notre Dame, let alone half. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, seriously. Aiden Benami, changes we want to see the most. Just go be dogs, be aggressive, and more communication, to be honest.
Agreed completely.
That's the show in a nutshell, I believe. Allow your guys who are elite level defenders to go out and be themselves. Go out and be aggressive, be themselves, play, find the football, attack, fly, all those different things, all those cliches when it comes to defensive football, all of those things. Do all of those things and allow your guys to do all of those things. Salty, which member of the 25 class is most likely to force himself into the defensive line starting lineup or have the most snaps as a rotational player?
Most likely. So who are we talking about here? Are we talking about Christopher Burgess? That's probably my answer. If he continues to develop, my answer is Christopher Burgess as being the most likely to force himself into the defensive starting line. I mean, because you have guys like Joe Reif and they might be. I was very impressed with what I saw from them in the spring, but Christopher Burgess is in a new home and in a room that, like we talked about earlier in the show, is pretty wide open. And so I would go Christopher Burgess with this one. I think he has a good chance of forcing his way into a rotation.
Dig it. Is it likely that Kingston Viliamo Asa will be ready to start at linebacker in the first game of the season? And even so, would it make more sense to gradually increase his playing time leading up to Miami?
I think you kind of answered your own question there, Salty. Is it likely that'll be ready to start? Yeah, I think Notre Dame, I think he will be available to play against Wisconsin. I think it would make more sense to increase his playing time leading up. Here's the benefit of Notre Dame having as deep of a linebacker room as what they have. They don't need Kingston to play 40 snaps in the season opener. They don't need him to play 30 snaps against Rice. There's a world where you don't even play. I mean, if it were up to me, I just don't play him in September. Like, there's no world where you need Kingston Viliama Asa to beat Wisconsin, Rice, Michigan State, and Purdue. You start working him back on the road against North Carolina. You work him back at home against Stanford. Then that way he's ready to go for BYU. That's what I would do with Kingston. I am more so the latter. That's where I'm at.
Wow. Sit him for a whole month? Nothing? Just
depends on how he looks in fall camp. But, I mean,
it's fair.
Play him a little.
But I'm so selfish. I want to see him out there, but
agreed.
But your assessment is the intelligent one by far. So I will have to defer to you on that one. But I am so selfish that I want him out there if he's healthy. But yours makes the most sense. Beyond its value as a defensive tactic, is experience in the secondary playing zone defense considered a positive by NFL teams?
It certainly doesn't hurt. That's for sure. I mean, the NFL doesn't play as much like straight up man defense as what some may think. Now, there are some teams that have the benefit of having a true lockdown man-to-man corner. I think of the Denver Broncos with Pat Surtain II back in his prime. You know, when Sauce Gardner was with the New York Jets, he was able to do that. In his prime, Jalen Ramsey was able to do that and just play straight up man. But yeah, it's considered a positive. It's definitely not a negative. You know, but I don't think that Chris Ash wanting to play more zone defense is trying to prepare his guys for the next level. That's just about going and putting a good product on the field. That's where I'm at with this one.
Yep, I agree. He's not – Chris Ash isn't doing things based on people's NFL resumes. That's not a thing, but the NFL specifically wants you to be as well-rounded of a player as you could possibly be in order to get on their squad, and they don't have to teach it to you, which is a huge plus. So – the more things you can do, the better off you're going to be. Another one from Salty, given the success Coach Ash has had on defense after the Purdue game, top 5 in several categories and top 20 in others, should he make any substantive changes? Substantive changes, I think is what that says.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, we talked a lot about that and the changes that we want to see. More aggressive overall philosophy. It's not so much changes from the things that we saw in the final 7 games. It's more so the things we saw in the final 7 games need to be the permanent changes that we see all throughout 2026. The show that we did in part 2 today is not indicative of our opinions whether he will or won't do that. It's more of the reason of why behind it. This is why it needs to change, and this is how it will look if it does change. That's where we're at more so with this one, Salty. Last couple here, Vince.
Here we go. Another one from Salty. After Miami, which opponent this season is likely to have the most challenging defensive secondary?
BYU. I would put in there. I mean, people are willing to write them off because, you know, they play out in Provo and they have the logo on their helmet. Terry Alexander and Evan Johnson are a legit cornerback duo. If they played in Columbus, if they played in Eugene, if they played in Athens, if they played in Tuscaloosa, they'd be getting significantly more attention. And then on top of that, Faletau Satuala is their safety returning from last year, and he led the team in tackles, and he was one of their leaders in interceptions as well. So BYU has a very legit secondary. Everything that I said about their defensive line, about how they're just kind of a bunch of try-hard, you know, high-motor guys, I do not feel the same about their secondary. They have some legit talent on the back end of their defense.
Love it.
Another one from Salty.
Oh, sorry. It looks exactly like the other one.
All good, bro.
One word difference. All right. After Miami, which opponent this season is likely to have the most challenging linebackers on defense?
Boy, this one is a little bit more competitive. BYU's in this conversation again. They got Cade Uluwave, transfer from Cal. They got Isaiah Glasgow coming back. Michigan State has some talent coming back at linebacker. You know, BYU has a couple of good returning linebackers. I think Brandon Booker is one of the guys that Brian had on his all-opponent team. Stanford with Matt Rose coming back. So there's a lot of viable candidates for who will have a most challenging linebacking core outside of Miami. I mean, there's a world where you could argue that Miami doesn't even have the best linebacking core that Notre Dame is going to face. Like, I like Motore, but after his injury, he kind of just wasn't the same guy. I know they also have Kamal Bonner, who came over from NC State last year. We'll see what he's like after the injury, but that's kind of where, losing Wesley Besainth is, I think, going to be a big blow for that linebacking core. So this is the one that you could argue that I don't know if the crown goes to Miami for having the best linebacking core.
Okay.
Last one here, Vince.
All right. From Jay Melvin. Trev, do you expect Tate Johnson, assuming he stays healthy, will be the best safety in college football? I like him a lot more than the Alabama safeties, even if he didn't play for ND.
Do I expect him to be the best safety in college football? No, because that's very lofty expectations to put on one player. I will say, do I think he has the potential to be? Absolutely. There's a lot of competition. It's not just the safeties down in Tuscaloosa. I mean, if McLean or Moore at Ohio State have a really good season, they could be in that contention. Obviously, you have to talk about, Bray Hubbard, and I think it's Keon Sabb at Alabama in that conversation. Coy Parrish transferred to Oregon. I mean, another player that he might be in contention with is the guy he's starting alongside in Don Schuler.
Right.
So is my expectation of him to be the best safety in college football? No. But I absolutely think that he has the potential to be that and be one of. That is absolutely for sure.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think he has the potential to be there. I think he's going to be in the conversation. But I don't know if that's the kind of expectation you want to have going into this season. And maybe he has a really good season, but not completely elite where he's the best. And maybe he wants to come back the following year, which I'd be okay with.
Would hear no complaints from my end. That is absolutely for sure.
Right.
I'm with you there completely.
All right, Trev. Well, that's it. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us this afternoon. Really appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow. If I'm not mistaken, Trev, we're going to do some O-line talk, some nationwide rankings of O-lines, maybe something along those lines. So some good stuff on tap for tomorrow's show. So make sure you check that out. We'll be back at 1:00 tomorrow afternoon. If you're listening on the podcast, appreciate you. We'll have those up as well in the evenings every single day. So, Trev, it was fun. It was exciting. We got more coming. So make sure you guys don't go anywhere. And of course, if you want to stay up to date on everything that's going on with Notre Dame football, go check out the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And again, we are in the works of our first ever preseason magazine. And in order to get your hands on that, you will have to be a member of the Irish Breakdown community. And the way to do that is on boards.irishbreakdown.com, and click the link and get after it there. And you'll have access to the magazine, and then all the breaking news and everything else to go along with it. So again, Trev, thanks a lot for hanging out with us today. That was a lot of fun. And everybody else, thanks for hanging with us. We will be back tomorrow afternoon at 1:00. So for Trev, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast presented by our friends at FanDuel.